Imagine a time before the towering skyscrapers we know today pierced to the New York skyline. Picture a vast, tranquil expanse of water, where the gentle lapping of waves against wooden hulls was the dominant sound. This was New York Harbor in the years leading up to the great wave of immigration. A quiet harbor, a place of serene promise before the hustle and bustle that would come to define it. Let's journey back to the early and mid-19th century. The air here doesn't yet carry the metallic tang of industry or the constant hum of a metropolis. Instead, it's filled with the salty scent of the Atlantic, the cry of gulls, and the creak of rigging from majestic sailing ships. These vessels, with their tall masts and billowing white sails, were the titans of their time. They moved with a grace and power that seemed almost natural, harnessing the wind to cross the vast ocean. Unlike the steam-belching giants that would follow, these ships were a quieter, more organic part of the seascape. For those aboard, the first sight of land after a long and arduous voyage was a moment of profound significance. The shores of Staten Island and Brooklyn would have appeared as lush, green landscapes, dotted with small settlements and farmland. The tip of Manhattan, what we now call the financial district, was a low-lying cluster of buildings, church spires rising as the tallest landmarks. It was a skyline of human scale, one that felt approachable and welcoming, not intimidating. The harbor itself was a natural wonder. The deep, sheltered waters that made it one of the finest natural ports in the world were calm and inviting. Small fishing boats and local ferries crisscrossed the bay, their occupants going about their daily lives, largely unaware of the monumental role this body of water was about to play in the story of a nation. The waters were cleaner then, teeming with life. Oysters were so plentiful in the harbor that their beds were a common source of food for New Yorkers of all classes. It was a thriving ecosystem, a world away from the busy, commercialized waterway it would become. For the few immigrants arriving during this earlier period, the experience was vastly different from the one we often imagine. There was no single, centralized processing station. There was no Statue of Liberty to greet them, no Ellis Island to process them. Passengers would often disembark directly into the city or at smaller, state-run facilities. The process was less structured, more ad hoc. Upon arrival, they would simply step off the boat and into the raw, burgeoning life of New York City. Think of the emotions of those early arrivals. They had endured weeks, sometimes months, at sea. They had faced storms, sickness, and the suffocating confinement of the ship's lower decks. And now, they were here. The air they breathed was the air of a new world, a new beginning. The harbor was their gateway, but it was a quiet one. It didn't roar with the sound of a million dreams arriving at once. It whispered a promise of opportunity. It was a place where one could catch their breath, gaze upon the shore, and imagine a future. This era of the quiet harbor is a crucial part of our story. It sets the stage for the dramatic changes to come. The sailing ships, symbols of an age of exploration and trade, were carrying more than just goods. They were carrying people, and with them the seeds of a new America. Each ship that glided into this peaceful bay was a harbinger of the future, a small ripple in the water that would soon grow into a tidal wave of humanity. The city on the shore was also in a state of quiet transformation. It was growing, but not yet exploding. Streets were being laid out, buildings were going up, and communities were forming. But it was still a place where you could know your neighbors, where the rhythm of life was tied to the rising and setting of the sun, and the arrival and departure of ships. The harbor was the city's heart, pumping life and commerce through its veins, but its pulse was steady and calm. This peacefulness, however, was deceptive. Beneath the surface, the forces of history were gathering. In Europe, social, political, and economic pressures were building. Famine, poverty, and persecution were pushing millions to look for an escape, a place of refuge and hope. And across the Atlantic, America was calling. The promise of land, of freedom, of a chance to build a better life, was a powerful magnet. The quiet harbor was the destination of that call. It was the endpoint of a long and desperate journey for some, a journey of ambition and adventure for others. But for all who saw it, it represented a threshold. Crossing these waters meant leaving the old world and all its constraints behind. Stepping onto the shores of New York meant stepping into a future that was unwritten, a story waiting to be told. As we stand here in our minds, on the shores of this pre-Ellis Island harbor, let's take a moment to absorb the scene. The wide, open sky. The gentle movement of the water. the elegant silhouettes of sailing ships at anchor. This is the calm before the storm. It is the deep breath a nation takes before it embarks on one of the greatest chapters in its history. This quiet harbor is not just a place. It's a symbol of potential. It's the blank page upon which the epic story of American immigration would be written. Join me next time as we witness the beginning of a monumental shift. The steamships arrive, the numbers swell, and this quiet harbor begins to transform, preparing for its new role as the gateway to a dream for millions. The journey is just beginning. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe for the next chapter. Before the iconic red brick walls of Ellis Island rose from the waters of New York Harbor, what did arriving in America look like for the millions who sought a new beginning? It's a story often overlooked, a chapter of American history that sets the stage for everything that followed. Today, we're turning back the clock to a time before the centralized federal processing we know, to an era of scattered arrivals, stuttering systems, and the burgeoning chaos that demanded a change. Let's journey back to the early and mid-19th century. The United States was a young, expanding nation, and the call for labor and settlement echoed across the Atlantic. People came from Ireland, Germany, Scandinavia, and beyond, driven by famine, political unrest, and the powerful dream of opportunity. But when their long, arduous sea voyage finally ended, there was no single, grand haul to welcome them. Instead, immigrants disembarked directly at various ports up and down the East Coast: Philadelphia, Baltimore, New Orleans, and of course, the busiest of them all, New York City. Upon arrival, the process was surprisingly decentralized. For the first 100 years of the nation's history, immigration was largely a state and local affair. There was no federal oversight. Imagine stepping off a crowded ship, not into a federal facility, but onto a bustling, chaotic pier. Your fate, your entry, was in the hands of state officials, or sometimes no officials at all. The primary concern for authorities wasn't your nationality or your story, but your health and your finances. They wanted to ensure you were carrying a contagious disease, and that you would unbecome a public charge, a burden on the state's welfare system. In New York, the main processing point before Ellis Island was a place called Castle Garden. Opened in 1855, it was America's very first immigration station, located at the tip of Manhattan in what is now Battery Park. This former fort was meant to bring order to the chaos and protect newly arrived immigrants from the swindlers and con artists who preyed on them at the docks. These runners, as they were called, would often mislead immigrants, overcharging them for everything from lodging and transportation to job placements that didn't exist. Castle Garden was a step toward a more humane and organized system. Inside, officials would register names, check for signs of illness, and offer some assistance with travel plans and finding work. Over its 35-year operation, more than 8 million immigrants passed through its gates. For a time, it seemed to work, but as the 19th century wore on, the tide of immigration began to change, and it swelled into a flood. The so-called new immigration began, bringing waves of people from Southern and Eastern Europe: Italians, Poles, Greeks, and Eastern European Jews. They were fleeing poverty, persecution, and political turmoil. Their cultures, languages, and religions were often different from the Northern Europeans who had come before, which unfortunately sparked a rise in nativist sentiment and suspicion among some segments of the American population. The sheer volume of arrivals was staggering. By the 1880s, Castle Garden was completely overwhelmed. The facility designed for a different era of immigration was now strained beyond its limits. Corruption, which had been a problem at the docks, began to creep into the system at Castle Garden itself. Staff were accused of taking bribes, and the facility's management was plagued by scandal. The state-run system was proving inadequate for the massive, national phenomena that immigration had become. The federal government realized it could no longer leave this critical function to the individual states. The Supreme Court had ruled in 1876 that regulating immigration was a federal responsibility, paving the way for a national takeover. The need for a larger, more secure, and federally controlled facility was undeniable. The old system was broken. It was inefficient, corrupt, and simply could not handle the scale of human migration that was reshaping the country. The federal government needed a place that could process thousands of people a day, a place that could be a true gateway to America, both a filter and a welcome mat. So, They looked to the harbor. They chose a small, unassuming piece of land, a little island called Ellis Island, which had previously been used as a naval munitions depot. They decided this would be the site for their ambitious new project, a federal immigration station built to handle the future of American immigration. The closure of Castle Garden in 1890 marked the end of an era. For a brief transitional period, immigrants were processed at a makeshift station called the barge office, which was even more chaotic and inadequate. It was a clear and urgent signal that the new facility couldn't be built fast enough. The stage was set. America was on the cusp of a new chapter, one that would be defined by the rigorous, systematic, and often emotional process that took place on a tiny island in New York Harbor. The age of Ellis Island was about to begin. Thanks for joining us on this journey back in time. It is crucial to understand what came before, to truly appreciate the role Ellis Island played in shaping the nation. If you found this history fascinating, make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel so you don't want to miss the next chapter in our series. We'll see you next time. Welcome back to our journey through the history of Ellis Island. Today, in Chapter 3, we're diving into a crucial question. Why Ellis Island? Out of all the possible locations along the vast American coastline, what made this tiny island in New York Harbor the chosen gateway for millions? Let's start with the most basic factor. Location, location, location. Ellis Island sits right in the heart of New York Harbor, one of the busiest and most important ports in the world. Think about it. The vast majority of transatlantic steamships carrying immigrants were already heading for New York City. It was the economic and cultural hub of the nation, and the logical endpoint for a long, arduous journey across the ocean. Placing the primary immigration station right here was simply a matter of practicality. It meant that ships didn't have to be rerouted, and the process could begin almost immediately upon their arrival in the harbor. The island's proximity to both New York City and the New Jersey shoreline was a double-edged sword, but one that was ultimately used to the government's advantage. It was close enough to the mainland for easy transport of supplies, staff, and, eventually, processed immigrants. Ferries could shuttle people and goods back and forth with relative ease. Yet, at the same time, the water surrounding the island created a natural barrier. This was incredibly important. The government wanted a controlled environment, a place where they could manage the massive influx of people without overwhelming the city all at once. The island acted as a filter, a quarantine zone, and an administrative center all in one. It prevented sick or legally detained individuals from simply disappearing into the crowded streets of New York, which was a major problem at the previous immigration station. Castle Garden, located at the tip of Manhattan. That direct connection to the city had led to chaos, corruption, and the exploitation of vulnerable newcomers. Ellis Island, by its very nature as an island, offered a solution to that chaos. It provided a sense of order and control that was desperately needed. Now, let's talk about size. You might be surprised to learn that the original Ellis Island was much smaller than the one we know today. It was a humble, 3-acre patch of land, barely peaking above the water at high tide. So, was it ideal from the start? Not exactly, but it had potential. The key here is the concept of landfill. The federal government saw this small, federally owned piece of land as a blank canvas. Starting in the late 1890s, they began a massive expansion project. The rock and earth excavated from the construction of New York City's subway tunnels, along with other dredge material, were used to build up the island. Over the years, it grew from its initial 3 acres to the sprawling 27.5 acres we see today. This expansion allowed for the construction of the massive main building, hospitals, dormitories, powerhouses, and all the other necessary facilities. The island was literally custom-built for its purpose. This ability to shape and expand the land as needed was a huge advantage. It meant the station could adapt and grow to handle the ever-increasing waves of immigration. They weren't constrained by an existing city block. They could design and build the most efficient processing facility they could imagine, precisely because they were creating the land it stood on. Another critical factor was federal ownership. Before it was an immigration station, Ellis Island had been used by the military. This meant it was already the property of the U.S. government. This was a huge logistical and financial advantage. There was no need to negotiate expensive land purchases from private owners or deal with the complexities of state and city politics. The federal government had complete jurisdiction. This allowed them to act quickly and decisively in establishing the new station. After the Treasury Department took control of immigration in 1890, they could fund, build, and operate the facility entirely under their own authority, ensuring a standardized process for everyone arriving in the country. This federal control was a deliberate move away from the statron system at Castle Garden, which had proven inadequate and corrupt, by choosing a federally owned property. The government was making a powerful statement. Immigration was now a national matter, to be handled with federal resources and under federal law. So, when we put it all together, the choice of Ellis Island becomes crystal clear. It wasn't just a random pick. It was a strategic decision based on a combination of perfect geography, practicality, and political foresight. It was located at the nexus of transatlantic travel. It provided a controlled, isolated environment that was still easily accessible. It was a blank slate that could be expanded and custom-built to meet the monumental task ahead. And finally, it was already under federal control, streamlining the entire process. This small patch of land, expanded and transformed, was uniquely suited to become the front door to America, the island of hope and tears for generations to come. Thanks for watching. Join us next time as we step inside the Great Hall and explore the actual inspection process that awaited the millions who landed on these shores. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss it. See you 10. Hey everyone, and welcome back to our series. Today, in Chapter 4, we're tackling a massive question. How do you build a gateway for millions? We're talking about the construction of the Ellis Island Immigration Station, a project of monumental scale and ambition. Let's rewind to the late 19th century. America is booming, and people from all over the world are flocking to its shores, dreaming of a new life. At New York's existing processing facility, Castle Garden was completely overwhelmed. It was too small, inefficient, and frankly, chaotic. The federal government knew they needed a better solution, a dedicated, purpose-built facility to handle this historic wave of immigration. The chosen spot, a small, 3-acre patch in New York Harbor, known as Ellis Island. Now, this island wasn't exactly ready for a massive construction project. In fact, it was mostly just landfill from New York City's subway excavations. The first major task was to expand it, doubling its size, with more landfill to create a stable foundation for the buildings to come. The initial plan was for a grand, fireproof structure, a symbol of America's welcome. The first station, a beautiful wooden building, designed in the Georgian style, opened its doors on January 1st, 1892. On that very first day, a young Irish girl named Annie Moore became the first immigrant to be processed, a moment steeped in symbolism. For 5 years, this wooden station served as the nation's primary gateway. Hundreds of thousands of people passed through its halls. But then, disaster struck. In the early morning hours of June 15th, 1897, a fire broke out. Because the structure was mostly made of wood, it was consumed by flames with shocking speed. Within hours, the entire station was reduced to a smoldering pile of ash. Miraculously, no lives were lost, but years of priceless immigration records, dating all the way back to 1855 from Castle Garden, were gone forever. It was a devastating loss. The government had to act fast. They couldn't just stop immigration. For the next 3 years, processing was moved back to a temporary facility at the barge office in Battery Park. Meanwhile, plans were drawn up for a new, even grander Ellis Island. This time, there would be no mistakes. The new station had to be absolutely fireproof. The architectural firm of Boren and Tilton won the commission. Their design was a masterpiece of the French Renaissance style, meant to be both impressive and reassuring. They chose red brick, limestone trim, and a slate roof, creating a building that looked more like a grand European palace than a government facility. This was a deliberate choice. For the arriving immigrants, many of whom had left behind poverty and hardship, this magnificent building was their first tangible sight of the American dream. It was designed to inspire all and convey a sense of importance and permanence. Construction began in earnest. This wasn't just about one building. It was about creating an entire complex. The main building, with its iconic registry room, was the centerpiece. But they also built a hospital complex, a powerhouse, a kitchen, a laundry, and dormitories. It was a self-contained city, designed to handle up to 5,000 people per day. The level of detail was incredible. The floors in the Great Hall were made of durable terracotta tiles to withstand the endless foot traffic. Large, arched windows were installed to flood the space with natural light, a stark contrast to the dark, cramped steerage compartments of the ships they had just left. The purpose behind this design was twofold. First, efficiency. Every part of the layout was meticulously planned to streamline the inspection process. Immigrants would enter, deposit their baggage, and be guided up the stairs to the registry room for medical and legal inspections. The flow was designed to be a continuous, logical progression, moving thousands of people through the system as quickly and humanely as possible. Every corner, every staircase, every doorway was part of this highly organized choreography. Second, the purpose was psychological. The grandeur of the architecture was meant to communicate the significance of the moment. This wasn't just another bureaucratic checkpoint. This was the threshold to a new life. The government wanted to project an image of a powerful, organized, and welcoming nation. While the experience could still be intimidating for many, the physical environment was intended to be one of order and dignity, not chaos and squalor. By December 17, 1900, the new fireproof station was ready. The doors swung open, and the processing of immigrants on Ellis Island resumed. This new facility was a marvel of modern engineering and logistics. It had its own power plant, providing electricity and steam heat. It had advanced ventilation systems to maintain public health. The hospital was equipped with the latest medical technology of the time, including X-ray machines, and staffed by the U.S. Public Health Service to identify and treat diseases. This wasn't just the building, it was a finely tuned machine. Its purpose was to filter, inspect, and process a tide of humanity on an unprecedented scale, all while upholding American laws and safeguarding public health. The construction of Ellis Island was a direct response to the needs of a rapidly growing and changing nation. It was a physical manifestation of America's complex attitude toward immigration, a mix of welcome, caution, and bureaucratic necessity. So when you see those iconic photos of the registry room, packed with people from every corner of the globe, remember the story behind the structure itself. Remember the fire that destroyed the first station, the ambition that built the second, and the incredible foresight that went into designing a facility to serve as the gateway to America for over 50 years. It stands today not just as a museum, but as a monument to the millions of journeys that started right there, and to the nation that built a palace to receive them. Thanks so much for watching. Join us next time for Chapter 5, where we'll walk in the footsteps of an immigrant and experience the inspection process step. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss it. See you then. Welcome back to our channel. Today, we're stepping back in time to a pivotal moment in American history. January 1st, 1892. Wasn't just any New Year's Day. On the shores of New York Harbor, a new chapter was beginning with the official opening of the Ellis Island Immigration Station. Imagine the scene. The air is cold, filled with a mix of excitement, anxiety, and hope. For years, immigrants arriving in New York had been processed at the old Castle Garden facility in Manhattan, which was plagued by corruption and overcrowding. But now, this brand new, federal-operated station promised a more orderly and dignified welcome to America. The island itself had undergone a massive transformation. Once, a small, marshy piece of land known as Gibbet Island, it was now home to a sprawling complex of new buildings, constructed primarily of Georgia pine. The main building, a two-story structure with slate blue trim, stood as a beacon for the thousands of people who would soon pass through its doors. On this historic first day, 3 large steamships were waiting in the harbor, their decks crowded with passengers who had endured long, arduous journeys across the Atlantic. These were the first people who would experience the new system, the first to set foot on Ellis Island. As the morning light broke over the harbor, the ferryboat Johnny Moore was dispatched to collect the first group of immigrants from the steamship Nevada. On board were 148 passengers, a diverse collection of souls from across Europe. The honor of being the very first immigrant processed at Ellis Island fell to a young girl from County Cork, Ireland. Her name was Annie Moore. She was just 17 years old, traveling with her 2 younger brothers, Anthony and Philip, to reunite with their parents who were already living in New York. You can just picture her, standing at the gangplank, a mix of nervousness and anticipation on her face. As she stepped onto the island, she wasn't just stepping onto a new piece of land. She was stepping into the history books. In a symbolic gesture, Colonel John B. Weber, the first commissioner of immigration, personally greeted her and presented her with a $10 gold piece, a significant sum of money at the time. It was a moment of celebration, a symbol of the promise that America held for so many. But for Annie and the others who followed, the process was just beginning. After disembarking, they were guided into the main building's massive registry room, which would later become known as the Great Hall. This cavernous space, with its high-arched ceiling and tiled floors, must have been both awe-inspiring and intimidating. Immigrants were herded through a series of roped-off pens, moving along a specific path designed for efficiency. The first major hurdle was the medical inspection. Doctors from the U.S. Marine Hospital Service stood along the lines, watching everyone who walked by. They were looking for any signs of illness or physical disability. This quick inspection was famously called the 6-second medical exam. Doctors would look for shortness of breath, strange gaits, or signs of contagious diseases. If a doctor saw anything concerning, they would use a piece of chalk to mark the person's clothing with a letter. H4 heart problems. E4 eye conditions like trachoma. L4 lameness. These chalk marks meant a more thorough examination, and potentially being sent back. The next stop was the legal inspection. Immigrants faced a barrage of questions from inspectors seated at tall desks. What is your name? Your occupation? How much money do you have? Do you have relatives in America? These weren't just simple queries. They were designed to ensure that each person was able to support themselves and would unbecome a public charge. They had to prove they were not criminals, anarchists, or contract laborers, all of which were grounds for exclusion. For many, this was the most nerve-wracking part. They had to answer through interpreters, hoping their words wouldn't be misunderstood, praying that a single wrong answer wouldn't shatter their dream of a new life. On that first day, around 700 immigrants were processed. The system, though new, moved with surprising speed. For most, the entire process on the island lasted only a few hours. After successfully passing the medical and legal inspections, the immigrants were free to go. They descended a staircase that became known as the Stairs of Separation at T-Bottom. They were directed to one of 3 areas. One path led to the ferry that would take them to New Jersey and the railway lines heading west. Another led to the ferry to Manhattan, where they could start their new lives in New York City. A third area, the one everyone dreaded, was for those who were detained for further review or medical treatment. For those who made it through, the feeling must have been one of overwhelming relief and joy. They exchanged their foreign currency for American dollars, bought their first American meal at the island's canteen, and purchased train tickets to their final destinations across the country. The opening of Ellis Island was hailed as a great success. Newspapers across the country reported on the event, praising the new, orderly system. It represented a shift in how America viewed immigration, moving from a often corrupt affair to a structured, federal responsibility. Colonel Weber and his staff had managed a smooth and efficient first day, setting the standard for the years to come. Of course, no one on that cold January day in 1892 could have possibly imagined the sheer scale of what was to come. They couldn't have known that this single station would process over 12 million immigrants over the next 6 decades. They didn't know that the original wooden buildings would burn to the ground just 5 years later, only to be replaced by the grand, fireproof structures we recognize today. But what they did know was that this was a day of new beginnings. For America, it was the start of a new era in immigration policy. And for Annie Moore and the nearly 700 others who passed through its gates, it was the first day of their American dream. Their journey across the ocean was over, but their journey in America was just beginning. They were the pioneers of Ellis Island, the first of millions who would look to the Statue of Liberty and see not just a statue, but a promise of freedom and opportunity. Their stories, and the story of Ellis Island itself, became woven into the very fabric of the nation. Thank you for joining us on this journey back to 1892. The story of Ellis Island is the story of America, a nation built by immigrants seeking a better life. If you found this chapter of history interesting, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into the past. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you won't miss our next episode. Thanks for watching. Have you ever wondered who was the very first person to step into a new life through the golden doors of Ellis Island? It wasn't a famous politician or a wealthy industrialist. It was a teenage girl from Ireland, with eyes full of hope and a heart full of dreams. Her name was Annie Moore, and her story is the story of America itself. Today, we're going to journey back to New Year's Day, 1892. Imagine the scene. A brand new, magnificent immigration station stands proudly in New York Harbor, ready to welcome the world. The air is crisp, filled with anticipation. Out on the water, the steamship SS Nevada cuts through the waves, carrying hundreds of souls seeking a fresh start. Among them is 15-year-old Annie, traveling with her two younger brothers, Anthony and Philip. Annie wasn't alone in her journey, of course. The ship was packed with families from all over Europe, each with their own reasons for leaving home. But fate, or perhaps just the luck of the Irish, had a special role for her. As the Nevada docked, Annie was chosen to be the very first immigrant to be processed at the newly opened Ellis Island. It was her 15th birthday, a coincidence that makes her story feel even more like a fairy tale. Picture her walking down the gangplank, her two little brothers in tow. She was probably a bit nervous, but also incredibly excited. Her parents and older siblings were already in New York, waiting for them. They had traveled ahead to build a foundation, and now the family was finally being reunited. For Annie, this wasn't just about entering a new country. It was about coming home. As she stepped into the Great Hall, a government official, the Superintendent of Immigration, Colonel John B. Weber, greeted her. He presented her with a $10 gold piece, a significant amount of money back then, a symbol of the bright future America promised. Newspapers reported the event, and suddenly, this young girl from County Cork became a symbol of the entire immigrant experience. Her gentle smile and hopeful eyes were captured for posterity, representing the millions who would follow in her footsteps. So what happened to Annie after her moment in the spotlight? For a long time, her story was a bit of a mystery. Many believed she moved west, lived a long and prosperous life, and embodied the American dream in its grandest form. But the real story, uncovered by historians much later, is perhaps even more poignant and relatable. Annie didn't move west. She and her brothers reunited with their parents right there in New York City, in a tenement on the Lower East Side. She never left. She married a German-American man who worked at a local bakery, and together they raised a large family in the same bustling, diverse neighborhood she first called home. Her life wasn't one of fame or great fortune. It was a life of hard work, family, and community. She faced the struggles that many working-class immigrants did, raising children in crowded conditions, dealing with loss, and striving to give her kids a better life than she had. She was a mother, a wife, a neighbor. She was the heart of her family, the glue that held them together. The true story of Annie Moore is not a rags-to-riches tale. It's something more profound. It's a story about resilience, love, and the quiet dignity of an ordinary life. She represents the millions of immigrants who didn't become millionaires or celebrities, but who built America from the ground up, one family, one neighborhood, one community at a time. They were the ones who laid the bricks, stitched the clothes, baked the bread, and raised the next generation of Americans. When we look at the Statue of Liberty in Ellis Island today, it's easy to think of immigration in grand, abstract terms. But at its core, it's a collection of individual stories. Stories like Annie's. A story of a 15-year-old girl on her birthday, stepping off a boat into a new world, not as a historical icon, but as a daughter and a sister, eager to be with her family. Her journey reminds us that the history of a nation is written in the lives of its people. Every family has a story of arrival, a tale of how they came to be where they are. Annie Moore's story is the first chapter in the Book of Ellis Island, a gentle, hopeful beginning to a much larger American epic. It's a reminder that behind every statistic and every historical date, there's a human heart beating with hope for a better tomorrow. So the next time you think about the immigrant experience, think of Annie. Think of that $10 gold piece, not as a ticket to wealth, but as a welcome gesture, a promise of opportunity, a chance to build a life. Her legacy isn't in monuments or mansions, but in the countless families who, like hers, came to America and made it their home. And that is a legacy worth celebrating. Thanks for joining me on this journey back in time. If you enjoyed this story, please give this video a like and subscribe to our channel for more hidden histories. We love sharing these tales with you. Until next time, stay curious. Imagine this. You've packed your entire life into a single trunk. You've said tearful goodbyes to family, friends, and the only home you've ever known. Now, you stand at the edge of a bustling port, staring at a colossal steamship. It's a metal giant, smoke billowing from its stacks, promising a new world, but also filled with terrifying uncertainty. This isn't just a ship, it's your ticket to a dream. Your vessel of hope, your gateway to the future. This was the reality for millions of immigrants at the turn of the 20th century. Welcome, as we journey back in time to explore the long, arduous, and transformative ocean voyage that defined a generation. Before the age of airplanes, the steamship was the bridge between the old world and the new. For those fleeing poverty, persecution, or simply seeking a better life, the journey across the Atlantic or Pacific was a rite of passage, but it was far from a luxury cruise. Most immigrants traveled in steerage, the lowest class of accommodation. Picture this. Deep in the belly of the ship, below the waterline, crammed into vast, open dormitories, bunks were stacked 3 or 4 high, with little more than a straw-filled mattress for comfort. There was no privacy, just the constant company of hundreds, sometimes thousands, of strangers. Men, women, and children from different countries, speaking different languages, all thrown together in a single, noisy, and often chaotic space. The air was thick with a mixture of unwashed bodies, stale food, and the ever-present smell of the ocean and the engine room. Seasickness was rampant, and with limited sanitation, the conditions could become incredibly challenging. Yet, within this cramped chaos, a unique community began to form. Despite the harsh realities, the spirit of hope was palpable. During the day, when the weather was fair, passengers would flock to the small, designated deck space allotted for steerage. This was their sanctuary, a place to breathe fresh air and escape the stuffiness below. Here, you'd see life in full swing. People shared stories of the homes they left behind and the dreams they carried for the future. Musicians would pull out fiddles, accordions, or mandolins, and soon the deck would be alive with the sounds of folk tunes from Ireland, Italy, Poland, or Russia. Spontaneous dances would erupt, a joyful defiance against the hardships of the journey. Friendships were forged over shared meals of hardtack biscuits and watery stew. Families looked out for one another, and experienced travelers offered advice to those who were nervous or scared. Children, ever resilient, would find ways to play, their laughter echoing across the deck, a sound of pure, unadulterated hope. It was in these moments that the shared dream of a new beginning felt most real. They were all in the same boat, quite literally, bound by a common purpose. But alongside the hope, fear was a constant companion. The vast, unforgiving ocean was a source of both wonder and terror. Storms were a frequent and terrifying ordeal. Imagine being tossed about in the dark, the ship groaning and creaking under the strain of colossal waves crashing against the hull. Possessions would slide across the floor, and the sounds of crashing water mixed with the prayers and cries of frightened passengers. For many who had never seen the ocean before, it was a humbling and frightening experience. There was also the fear of the unknown. What awaited them in America? Would they be allowed in? Stories of the rigorous inspections at Ellis Island or Angel Island circulated through the ship, fueling anxiety. Rumors spread like wildfire, tales of families being separated, of people being sent back for failing a health exam or not having enough money. Every day brought them closer to their destination, but it also brought them closer to this moment of judgment. The anticipation was a double-edged sword, a mixture of excitement for the new and dread for the potential rejection. Food on the journey was basic and monotonous. Steerage passengers lined up with their own tin plates and cups for meals that often consisted of soup, boiled potatoes, herring, and bread. The quality was poor, and the taste was often a far cry from the home-cooked meals they were used to. Water was rationed and often tasted metallic. For many, this was just another hardship to endure, a small price to pay for the promise of a better life. They supplemented their meager rations with whatever food they had managed to bring from home-dried sausages, hard cheeses, and preserved fruits. These small tastes of home were precious, a connection to the world they had left behind. Sharing these treasures was an act of kindness and solidarity, a way of saying, "We are in this together." As the journey neared its end, a new feeling would take hold of the ship. A buzz of excitement would ripple through the passengers. The first sighting of land was a moment of pure, unadulterated joy. "Cries of land, land," would echo from the deck, and people would rush to catch a glimpse of the new world. And then, the ultimate symbol of their journey's end would appear on the horizon. The Statue of Liberty. For those arriving in New York, seeing Lady Liberty for the first time was an overwhelmingly emotional experience. She wasn't just a statue. She was a promise. A promise of freedom, of opportunity, of a future where their hard work could build a new life for themselves and their children. Tears of relief and joy would stream down their faces as they gazed upon this beacon of hope. The long, difficult voyage was finally over. The fear and hardship began to recede, replaced by a surge of anticipation for the life that was about to begin. They had made it. They had crossed the ocean. The steamship journey was more than just a trip from one point to another. It was a crucible that tested the resilience, hope, and courage of millions. It stripped them of their old identities and forged them into something new. They boarded as farmers, craftsmen, and laborers from 100 different villages, but they disembarked as immigrants, as future Americans. The bonds formed in the crowded steerage decks, the shared fears in the midst of a storm, and the collective joy at the sight of a new shore. All of these experiences wove them into the fabric of a new nation. This long ocean voyage was the first chapter of their American story, a story of sacrifice, determination, and the enduring power of the human spirit to dream of a better world. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey back in time. It is a powerful reminder of the struggles and triumphs that have shaped the world we live in today. If you found this story moving, please hit that like button and subscribe for more chapters from our shared history. I'd love to hear your thoughts, or if you have any family stories of immigration, in the comments below. Until next time, stay curious. Imagine this. You've spent weeks, maybe even months, crammed onto a steamship, tossed about by the relentless waves of the Atlantic. The air below deck is thick with the smells of sweat, sickness, and unwashed bodies. You've left everything you've ever known behind: your home, your family, your language, your culture. All you have are the clothes on your back, a small bundle of possessions, and a fragile, flickering hope for a new life in a place you've only heard about in stories. A land of promise, a land of freedom. America. For millions of immigrants in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, this wasn't imagination. This was their reality. Their journey was a grueling test of endurance, a testament to the human spirit's unyielding desire for something better. They were farmers and laborers, craftsmen and dreamers, fleeing poverty, persecution, and political turmoil. They were heading towards an unknown future, fueled by a powerful mix of fear and faith. Then, one morning, a change would ripple through the ship. A whisper at first, growing into a murmur, then a full-blown roar of excitement. Lan, lan, oh. People would scramble from the cramped, dark steerage, pushing their way up to the crowded decks, their eyes straining towards the horizon. And there it was, not Hoostland, but a sight that would be forever etched into their memories. The first glimpse of America. Think of the sheer, overwhelming emotion of that moment. The weeks of misery and uncertainty would begin to melt away, replaced by a wave of relief and anticipation. They would point and shout, tears streaming down their faces, a jumble of languages all expressing the same thing. We made it. We're here. As the ship drew closer, the skyline of New York City would slowly come into focus. It was unlike anything they had ever seen. A forest of towering buildings, skyscrapers reaching for the heavens, a symbol of industrial might and boundless ambition. To someone from a small European village, it must have looked like a city built by giants, a metropolis from another world. The noise of the city would carry across the water the distant clang of trolleys, the whistles of tugboats, the hum of a million lives being lived. It was the sound of a new beginning, and then they would see her. Rising from the harbor, majestic and serene, was the Statue of Liberty, a gift from France, dedicated in 1886. She wasn't just a statue. She was a promise. Lady Liberty, they called her. Holding her torch high, she was a beacon of light, a symbol of welcome to the tired, the poor, the huddled masses yearning to breathe free, as the poem at her base would later declare. Can you feel the power of that image? For these new arrivals, she was the physical embodiment of the American dream. She was the first friendly face in a strange, new land. Her copper-green form represented everything they had sacrificed so much to find. Freedom from oppression, the chance for opportunity and the hope that their children could have a better life. An immigrant from Armenia recalled, "I saw the Statue of Liberty, and I said to myself, 'Lady, you're such a beautiful. You opened your arms, and you get all the foreigners here. Give me a chance to prove that I am worth it, to do something, to be someone in America.' And she heard me." This sentiment was shared by countless others. Seeing the statue was a deeply personal and profoundly moving experience. It was a moment of transformation. They arrived as Poles, Italians, Irish, Germans, Jews. But as they sailed past Lady Liberty, they began to see themselves as something new. Americans in the making. The sight of the harbor wasn't just a geographical arrival. It was a spiritual one. It was the culmination of a long and difficult pilgrimage. The salty air they breathed felt different. It was the air of freedom. The sky above seemed brighter. The cacophony of the city wasn't just noise. It was a symphony of possibility. Many would fall to their knees in prayer, thanking God for their safe passage. Others would embrace strangers, united by their shared journey and their common hope. They would hold their children up to see, whispering, "Look, that's America." They were passing the dream from one generation to the next before they had even set foot on solid ground. This moment was so significant because it stood in stark contrast to the world they had left behind. In Europe, many had faced rigid class structures, limited economic mobility, and the constant threat of violence or conscription. Ancient monuments there often symbolized the power of kings and empires, a power that had often been used to oppress them. But the Statue of Liberty symbolized the power of the people. It represented a government of the people. Be the people for the people. Of course, the reality they would soon face at Ellis Island and in the crowded tenements of the Lower East Side would be far from easy. There would be new challenges, language barriers, discrimination, and the hard, often grueling work of building a life from scratch. The streets were not, as the myth went, paved with gold. But that first sight of the harbor gave them the strength to face those challenges. It was a powerful dose of inspiration, a visual confirmation that their leap of faith was not in vain. That initial vision of hope became a foundational part of the American identity, a story passed down through generations. Today, many Americans can trace their ancestry back to someone who stood on that ship deck, their heart pounding as they saw the skyline and the statue for the first time. It's a shared heritage, a reminder that America, at its core, is a nation of immigrants, built by the courage and determination of those who came seeking a new beginning. The image is iconic for a reason. It captures the essence of the American experiment. It's a story of risk and reward, of leaving the old world for the new. It's a testament to the enduring human quest for freedom and a better life. The first sight of America wasn't just a view of a harbor. It was a glimpse into the future, a future they were ready to build with their own two hands. Next time you see a picture of the Statue of Liberty, take a moment to think about what she represented to those millions of hopeful souls. She was the first chapter of their American story, a symbol that promised that, here, in this new land, anything was possible. Thanks for watching. If you found this story moving, please give this video a like and subscribe to our channel for more journeys into the past. We'd love to hear your own family's immigration stories in the comments below. See you next time. Imagine you've just spent weeks, maybe even months, crossing the vast, unpredictable Atlantic Ocean. Your journey wasn't on a luxury liner. It was in the crowded, often unsanitary conditions of steerage. You've endured storms, sickness, and the constant uncertainty of what lies ahead. And then, one morning, you wake up to a buzz of excitement spreading through the ship. You rush to the deck, and there it is. The New York skyline, hazy in the distance, and a colossal green lady holding a torch. The Statue of Liberty. For millions, this wasn't just a statue. It was the first breathtaking glimpse of a new life, a symbol of everything they had dreamed of. The promise of America was finally within sight. But the journey wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The massive ocean liners were too big to dock at the small island ahead, the one everyone was whispering about. Ellis Island. So, for the vast majority of passengers, those in first and second class were about to have a very different experience. For them, a brief health and legal inspection would happen right there on the ship. If they passed, and most did, they would disembark directly onto the piers in Manhattan, their American journey beginning almost immediately. They were often wealthier, considered less of a health risk, and their paperwork was usually in perfect order. They would step off the ship and melt into the bustling city, free to start their new lives. But for you, and for the thousands crammed into steerage with you, the ordeal was just beginning. You watch as the first and second class passengers leave, and then you wait. You wait for hours, sometimes even a full day, on the same ship that has been your cramped home for weeks. Finally, the call comes. It's time to board the ferry. This wasn't a scenic tour boat. These were humble, workhorse vessels, often barges or smaller steam ferries, that shuttled back and forth between the anchored ocean liners and Ellis Island. One of the most famous was named the General, a boat that would carry countless souls on this final, short leg of their sea voyage. Crowds of people, speaking dozens of different languages, are herded down the gangplank onto these smaller boats. Imagine the chaos, the noise, the mix of fear and hope. You're clutching your few worldly possessions, maybe a small wooden trunk or a bundle of clothes tied with rope. You're trying to keep your family close, holding tightly to your children's hands. The ferry is packed, standing room only. You're pressed against strangers from Italy, Poland, Ireland, Russia, all of you, united by this one shared, anxious moment. The ferry chugs to life, its engine vibrating through the wooden deck. As it pulls away from the colossal shadow of the ocean liner, you get a clearer view. There it is, dead ahead, Ellis Island. From the ferry, it looks imposing, with its grand, red brick main building topped with 4 green copper domes. It looks more like a palace or a grand train station than an immigration center. This sight could spark a flicker of hope. Such a grand building must mean America is a prosperous, organized place. But it also sparks a deep, gnawing anxiety. This is the Isle of Tears you've heard whispers about. This is the final gate. Everything you've sacrificed, everyone you've left behind, it all comes down to what happens inside that building. The ferry ride itself is short, maybe only 15 or 20 minutes, but it must have felt like an eternity. With every foot the ferry travels across the water, the reality of the situation sinks in. You can see the people on the island, officials in uniforms, and other groups of immigrants being moved from place to place. The sheer scale of the operation is overwhelming. This isn't just a building. It's a processing machine, and you are about to be fed into it. There's no turning back now. The ferry bumps against the dock at Ellis Island. The gangplank is lowered with a loud thud. An official shouts in a language you may or may not understand, gesturing for everyone to move. You take a deep breath, gather your courage, and step off the ferry. Your feet touch the soil of Ellis Island. You are no longer on a ship, no longer at sea. You have arrived, but you are not yet in America. First, you must pass through the Great Hole, the medical exams, the legal questions. The final, and perhaps most difficult, part of your journey has just begun. This short ferry ride was the critical transition, the bridge between the old world and the threshold of the new. It carried people from the anonymity of the ocean to the stark reality of the inspection hall. A brief but profound voyage across the harbor that determined the fate of millions. Thank you for watching, and be sure to subscribe for our next chapter, where we'll step inside the registry room and face the daunting inspections at Ellis Island. Welcome back, history lovers, to our ongoing exploration of Ellis Island. Today, we step through the doors and into the heart of the entire operation, the Great Hall. This is Chapter 10. Inside the Great Hall. Picture this. You've just climbed that steep staircase, the one they called the Stairs of Separation. You're tired, you're anxious, and you're carrying everything you own. You walk through a set of double doors, and suddenly, the world opens up. You are standing in the registry room, a space so vast it feels like it could hold the sky. The room is immense, 200 feet long, 100 feet wide, with a soaring, 56-foot-high vaulted ceiling. Sunlight streams through massive arched windows, illuminating dust motes, dancing in the air, creating what some call cathedrals of light. The sheer scale of the place was designed to impress, and perhaps to intimidate. For many, it was the largest indoor space they had ever seen in their lives. But it wasn't the size that hit you first. It was the sound. Imagine the sound of 2,000 people, all talking at once, but in dozens of different languages. A true Tower of Babel. The noise echoed and bounced off the tiled walls and ceiling, a constant, overwhelming hum of human voices. You'd hear a symphony of languages: Italian, Polish, German, Yiddish, Hungarian, Russian, and so many more. Interspersed with the chatter were the cries of tired babies, the shuffling of thousands of feet on the red tile floor, and the sharp, authoritative shouts of uniformed inspectors calling out names or numbers. It was a chaotic, confusing, and deafening environment. The air itself was thick with a mixture of smells: the damp wool of overcoats, the lingering scent of disinfectant used to clean the floors, the aroma of unfamiliar foods from bundles, and the undeniable smell of unwashed bodies after weeks at sea. It was the scent of humanity, concentrated and intense. The atmosphere was electric, a palpable blend of hope and fear. Look around the room. You'd see families huddled together, clutching their precious documents, their faces a mixture of exhaustion and nervous anticipation. Children, wide-eyed, would be staring up at the vaulted ceiling or at the strange American officials. Some people looked confident, others were visibly trembling. Everyone was waiting. The entire room was a sea of people, organized into rows by a labyrinth of metal railings, like cattle pens, guiding them forward, step by step, toward the inspection desks. These railings snaked through the entire floor, creating a slow-moving, serpentine line. You would spend hours in these lines, shuffling forward a few feet at a time. There was nowhere to sit, at least not in the early years. You stood, you waited, and you watched. You watched the people ahead of you, trying to understand what was happening at the front. You saw some families pass through with smiles of relief, while others were pulled aside, their faces etched with worry. This was the great filter. At the far end of the hall, perched on high desks, like judges, sat the primary line inspectors. They held the fate of every single person in this room in their hands. From your place in line, they seemed distant and powerful. The whole process was designed to be efficient, a human processing machine. Every aspect of the Great Hall, its size, its sounds, its very layout, was meant to manage and control the massive flow of humanity passing through it. For the immigrants, this room was a formidable purgatory. It was the final barrier between their old life and their new one. The hours spent in the Great Hall were among the most stressful of their entire journey. Every shouted command you didn't understand, every stern look from an official, could feel like a potential rejection. You're surrounded by strangers. You can't understand most of what's being said, and your entire future hangs in the balance, all within these four walls. Yet, despite the fear and the chaos, the Great Hall was also a place of incredible hope. This room was the gateway to a dream. The dream of freedom, of opportunity, of a better life for their children. For every anxious face, there was another filled with determination. They had come this far, endured so much. They were standing on the threshold of America. The noise, the crowds, the waiting, it was all part of the price of admission. Think of the sheer number of stories contained in this one room. Over 12 million people passed through this hall. Each person in that line had a name, a family, a history, and a dream. They were farmers, craftsmen, scholars, and laborers. They were leaving behind poverty, persecution, and hopelessness, all for a chance at something new. And it all came down to a few moments of judgment, right here, in the Great Hall. As you stand there, absorbing the scene, you realize this isn't just a big room in an old building. It is a crucible, a place where identities were tested, families were sometimes separated, and destinies were decided. The echoes of those millions of voices, their hopes and their fears, still linger in this space today. When you visit Ellis Island now, and you stand in the silence of the restored registry room, you can almost hear them. You can feel the weight of all that history. It's a powerful, humbling experience, and that's where we'll pause for today. The journey through the Great Hall has only just begun. In our next chapter, we'll follow the immigrants as they finally reach the inspectors' desks and face the questions that would determine their fate. Thanks for watching. If you're finding this series valuable, please give it a like. And don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss the next chapter of our journey through Ellis Island. See you next time. Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. Today, we're diving into a topic that many of you have asked about, something that can feel a bit daunting or mysterious: medical inspections. we're going to break down Chapter 11, which covers everything you need to know. The goal here is to demystify the process, explain why each step is so important, and help you understand that it's all designed for your well-being. So, grab a seat, get comfortable, and let's get started. First things first, what exactly is a medical inspection? Think of it as a comprehensive health checkup, but with a very specific purpose. Unlike your annual physical with your family doctor, these inspections are designed to ensure that an individual is fit for a particular role, environment, or duty. This isn't about judging your health. It's about ensuring safety both for you and for those around you. The core principle is prevention. By identifying potential health issues early on, we can manage them before they become serious problems, especially in situations where medical support might not be immediately available. So, let's walk through what typically happens. The process usually begins long before you even see a doctor. You'll start with paperwork. And I know, nobody loves paperwork, but this part is crucial. You'll fill out a detailed medical history questionnaire. This covers everything from your childhood illnesses, past surgeries, any allergies you might have, and your family's medical history. It's incredibly important to be honest and thorough here. Sometimes, a small detail from your past can be a key piece of the puzzle for the medical team. Forgetting to mention an allergy or a previous injury could have significant consequences down the line. Remember, this information is confidential and is used solely for the purpose of your health assessment. After the paperwork, you'll move on to the physical measurements. This is the part everyone is familiar with. Height, weight, and vital signs. They'll check your blood pressure, heart rate, and temperature. These basic metrics provide a snapshot of your current health. For example, consistently high blood pressure could indicate an underlying issue that needs to be addressed. Your body mass index, or BMI, is also calculated from your height and weight. While it's not a perfect measure for everyone, it gives the medical team a general idea of your body composition and can be a starting point for discussions about nutrition and fitness. Next up are the sensory checks, which are absolutely critical for many roles. This includes vision and hearing tests. For your vision, they'll test your visual acuity, how clearly you can see at different distances using the classic eye chart. They'll also check for color blindness, your peripheral vision, and depth perception. Imagine being in a situation where you need to spot a specific color or judge a distance accurately. You can see why these tests are non-negotiable. Similarly, the hearing test, or audiogram, measures your ability to hear a range of frequencies at different volumes. Clear communication is often a matter of safety, so ensuring your hearing is up to standard is paramount. Then we move into the more hands-on part of the examination. The doctor will perform a thorough physical assessment. This is a head-to-toe check. They'll examine your ears, nose, and throat. Listen to your heart and lungs with a stethoscope to check for any murmurs or irregular breathing sounds, and feel your abdomen to check your organs. They'll also assess your musculoskeletal system, your bones, joints, and muscles. This involves checking your range of motion, your reflexes, and your overall strength and posture. They're re-looking for any signs of current or past injuries that could be aggravated by physical activity or specific duties. Now, let's talk about the part that sometimes makes people a little nervous. Lab tests. This usually involves giving a blood sample and a urine sample. These simple samples can tell the medical team a huge amount about what is going on inside your body. The blood test, often called a complete blood count or CBC, checks for things like anemia, infections, and other abnormalities with your red and white blood cells. They'll also run a metabolic panel, which looks at your kidney and liver function, blood sugar levels, and electrolyte balance. The urinalysis can detect signs of kidney problems, diabetes, and other metabolic conditions. It's like getting a detailed report from your body's internal systems. Depending on the specific requirements of the role or organization, there might be additional, more specialized tests. For example, some positions might require a chest X-ray to get a clear picture of your lungs and heart. An electrocardiogram, or EKG, might be used to record the electrical activity of your heart, looking for any rhythm problems. For roles that are physically demanding, a stress test might be conducted. This is where you walk or run on a treadmill while hooked up to an EKG, allowing doctors to see how your heart responds to physical exertion. Mental health screenings are also becoming a standard and vital part of these inspections, often involving a questionnaire or a conversation with a psychologist to assess your psychological resilience and well-being. So, why all this scrutiny? Let's put it into context. The primary reason, as I mentioned, is safety. It's about ensuring that you are not put in a position where your health could fail, endangering yourself or others. It's about matching the right person to the right job from a medical standpoint. It's also about establishing a baseline. This initial medical inspection creates a detailed record of your health at the start. This baseline is incredibly useful for monitoring your health over time. If any issues arise later, doctors can compare your current condition to your initial baseline to see what has changed. This is proactive healthcare at its best. Finally, what happens after the inspection? Once all the tests are complete and the results are in, the medical team will review your entire file. They'll determine if you meet the required medical standards. There are usually 3 possible outcomes. You're cleared for duty. You're cleared with certain limitations or a requirement for a follow-up. Or you're found to be medically unfit for the specific role. If there's an issue, it doesn't always mean a dead end. Often, it's something that can be managed or treated. The medical team will provide guidance and a plan to address the concern. The entire process is governed by strict standards and protocols to ensure it is fair, consistent, and objective for everyone. It's not personal. It's a systematic way of safeguarding health and ensuring operational readiness. Understanding the why behind each test can really help reduce the anxiety that often comes with these inspections. Every poke, prod, and question has a purpose, and that purpose is to look out for you. It's a foundational piece of a much larger system designed to keep everyone safe and healthy. And that's a wrap on our deep dive into Chapter 11 and medical inspections. I hope this explanation has been helpful and has cleared up some of the mystery. It's all about preparation and prevention. If you have an inspection coming up, the best thing you can do is be rested, be hydrated, and most importantly, be honest. Thank you so much for tuning in today. If you found this video informative, please give it a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe for more content like this. Stay safe, stay healthy, and I'll see you in the next video. Picture this. You've just endured a long, grueling journey across the ocean, leaving everything you've ever known behind. You've finally arrived at the shores of America, the land of opportunity. But before you can take your first steps into this new world, there's one final, nerve-wracking hurdle: the legal questioning. For countless immigrants arriving at places like Ellis Island in the early 20th century, this was a moment filled with both hope and dread. It wasn't a long, drawn-out interrogation like you might see in movies. In fact, it was surprisingly brief, often lasting only a couple of minutes. Imagine standing in a massive, noisy hall, feeling overwhelmed and exhausted, and then facing an inspector who holds your entire future in their hands. These inspectors, sitting at desks arranged in rows, would fire off a series of questions. They had the ship's manifest in front of them, a document that already contained about 29 pieces of information about each passenger. The goal of the interview was simple: to verify that the answers you gave matched the information on the manifest. Any discrepancy, any hesitation, could raise a red flag. So, what kind of questions did they ask? They were direct and to the point. What is your name? What is your age? Are you married or single? What is your occupation? This might seem straightforward, but remember, many immigrants didn't speak English. They had to rely on interpreters, who were often overworked in juggling multiple languages at once. A simple misunderstanding could lead to a wrong answer. They'd also ask about your destination. Who are you going to meet? What is their address? Immigrants were expected to have a specific person and place to go. You couldn't just say, "I'm going to Chicago." You needed a name, a street, a real connection. This was to ensure you wouldn't become a public charge, meaning a burden on the state. Many had the address of a relative or a friend from their old village pinned to their coat. One of the most crucial questions was about money. How much money do you have? There wasn't a strict minimum, but officials wanted to see that you had some funds to support yourself initially. The amount often expected was around $25, which was a significant sum back then. If you had very little or no money, it was a major cause for concern. Another key area of questioning was your work. What can you do? Have you been promised a job? This was a tricky one. While they wanted to know you could support yourself, the Foreign Act of 1885 actually made it illegal for employers to prearrange contract labor. So, if an immigrant said, "Yes, I have a job waiting for me at the steel mill," that could actually get them deported. They had to walk a fine line, showing they were capable of working without having a prearranged contract. The inspectors were also trained to look for signs of deception. They would observe your posture, your eye contact, and your general demeanor. They were essentially early profilers, trying to determine your character in just a few moments. They might ask a trick question, like asking a woman who said she was meeting her husband if she knew his specific whereabouts, to see if her story held up. Health was also a factor, even at this stage. Questions like, have you ever been in a hospital or an asylum, were common. This was a follow-up to the medical inspection they had already gone through. The goal was to filter out anyone with physical or mental conditions that might prevent them from working or require public care. And then there were the LPC questions, designed to identify anyone likely to become a public charge. This was a broad, catch-all category. Are you a polygamist? An anarchist? Have you ever been convicted of a crime? A yes to any of these was grounds for immediate detention and a likely return journey. For single women and children traveling alone, the questioning was even more intense, as they were considered more vulnerable and at higher risk of becoming public charges. Think about the immense pressure. A 2-minute interview, a language barrier, and a series of questions where one wrong word could shatter your American dream. For the vast majority, around 98%, the answers were satisfactory. The manifest checked out, and they were waved through to the stairs of separation, which led to their new lives. But for that crucial 2%, a chalk mark on their coat meant they were detained for further questioning by a board of special inquiry. This was a much more formal and intimidating legal hearing, where their fate would be decided. These short interviews, while seemingly simple, were the final gatekeepers of America. A quick but powerful test of an immigrant's past, present, and potential future. They represent a fascinating and deeply human chapter in the story of immigration. Thanks for watching. If you found this glimpse into the past interesting, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more stories. See you next time. Hey everyone, and welcome back to our deep dive into the historical context of pandemics. Today, we're exploring a fascinating and somber piece of history: the chalk marks used during plagues. Have you ever seen old illustrations or read stories about houses marked with crosses and wondered what they really meant? Well, let's uncover the meaning behind these symbols. During times of widespread illness, like the Great Plague of London in the 17th century, public health measures were, let's say, quite rudimentary compared to today. One of the most visible and chilling practices was marking the doors of infected households. This was a form of quarantine enforcement, a clear signal to the public to stay away. The most common symbol was a large cross, often painted or drawn with chalk. This wasn't just a random mark, it was an official sign, mandated by authorities. Alongside the cross, you'd often find the words, "Lord, have mercy upon us." This phrase tells you so much about the mindset of the time. It was a plea for divine intervention in a situation that felt utterly hopeless and beyond human control. Imagine the fear and despair of seeing that mark appear on your own door or your neighbor's. It meant you were sealed inside, often with the sick and dying members of your family, for a period of 40 days. This period, known as quarantine, has its roots in the Italian corona, giorni meaning 40 days, a practice started in Venice centuries earlier to protect against the Black Death. So, who was responsible for these marks? Special officials, often called searchers or examiners of the dead, were appointed to identify infected houses. Their job was grim. They would enter homes to confirm cases of the plague, and then instruct watchmen to paint the cross on the door. These watchmen would then stand guard, ensuring no one entered or left the quarantined house. They were responsible for bringing food and supplies to the family locked inside, often passing them through a window on a long pole to maintain distance. While the cross was the most famous symbol, other marks were also used in different regions and times. Sometimes, a simple P4, plague or pestilence, Wohldebi, Use. The color of the mark could also have significance. A red cross was common, as red was often associated with warning and disease. However, simple white chalk was also frequently used due to its availability. It's important to understand the dual purpose of these marks. On one hand, they were a practical, if brutal, public health tool designed to contain the spread of the disease. In an age without knowledge of germs or viruses, Isolating the sick was one of the few methods they had. It was a desperate attempt to create a barrier between the healthy and the infected. On the other hand, these marks became powerful symbols of social stigma. A marked house was a place of death and suffering. Neighbors would shun it, and the occupants were often left to face their fate alone. The psychological impact on those inside must have been immense, trapped, sick, and ostracized. This practice also reveals the class divides of the time. The wealthy could often flee the cities when plague struck, heading to their country estates to wait out the epidemic. It was the poor, living in crowded and unsanitary conditions, who were most often trapped behind the chalk-marked doors. They had nowhere else to go. Their stories are the ones often lost to history, but the chalk marks serve as a silent testament to their suffering. Looking at this from a modern perspective, it's easy to judge these methods as harsh, but they were born out of sheer terror and a lack of scientific understanding. The officials and doctors of the time were using the best knowledge they had. They believed diseases spread through miasmas, or bad air, so sealing up a house was a logical step in their view to contain that bad air. Let's also talk about the doctors, the plague doctors. You've probably seen pictures of them with their long, bird-like masks. While these figures are iconic, the day-to-day work of identifying the sick often fell to those less specialized searchers. When a doctor did visit, their diagnosis would lead to the house being marked. The chalk symbols were essentially the final word, the public declaration of the doctor's private assessment. These symbols were the public face of a private tragedy, turning a family's personal health crisis into a public spectacle of warning. So, the next time you see a cross marked on a door in a movie or a book set during a plague, you'll know the deep and sorrowful meaning behind it. It wasn't just a random sign. It was an official quarantine order, a public plea for mercy, a symbol of isolation, and a stark reminder of a community's desperate struggle for survival. It represents a chapter in human history where fear and limited knowledge led to drastic measures. Measures that we can now look back on and learn from. Understanding this history helps us appreciate the incredible progress we've made in medicine and public health. Thanks so much for joining me on this historical journey today. It's a heavy topic, but understanding our past is crucial. If you found this interesting, please give this video a like and subscribe for more deep dives into history. Let me know in the comments if there are other historical symbols you'd like to explore. Stay curious, and I'll see you in the next video. Imagine being trapped in a waiting room, not for an hour or two, but for days, weeks, even months. Your life is on pause, hanging by a thread, waiting for a decision that will change everything. This is the reality for countless people caught in the limbo of detention centers and immigration waiting rooms. This isn't just about bureaucracy. It's about the human costs of waiting. Today, we're going to step into that world, a world most of us never see. We'll hear the stories of people whose lives were put on hold, confined within four walls, where every tick of the clock echoes with uncertainty. These aren't just numbers or cases. They are fathers, mothers, sons, and daughters, each with a story of hope, fear, and incredible resilience. Let's start with Javier. He was a chef back home, known for his incredible seafood dishes. Fleeing threats against his family, he arrived seeking safety, only to find himself in a detention facility. He described the first few days as a blur of confusion and fear. The worst part, he said, wasn't the food or the crowded conditions. It was the not knowing. Every morning he'd wake up and ask, "Is today the day?" And every night, he'd go to sleep with the same question unanswered. He told me about the friendships forged in that waiting room. People from all over the world, speaking different languages, found ways to communicate. They'd share stories of their past lives, their families, their dreams. A simple game of cards or a shared laugh became a lifeline, a small act of defiance against the crushing weight of the unknown. Javier started drawing sketches of his favorite recipes on scraps of paper, a way to keep his passion and his identity alive. For 47 days, he waited. 47 days of his life spent in a featureless room, just waiting for a piece of paper to decide his future. Then there's Amina, a young woman who was a university student. She was separated from her younger brother during their journey. While she was held in a processing center, her only goal was to find him. Every official she spoke to, her first question was always, "Have you heard anything about my brother?" The days bled into one another. She described the feeling as being a ghost, present in body but with her mind and heart elsewhere. She said the silence was the hardest part. Not the actual silence, because the room was always filled with the low hum of anxiety, coughs, and quiet conversations. But the silence from the outside world. No news, no updates, just waiting. She spent her time trying to learn English from a tattered picture book someone had left behind. She said it was a way to prepare for a future she was uneven sure she would have. She waited for 3 long weeks, an eternity when you're 19 and responsible for your little brother's safety. These waiting rooms are designed to be temporary, but for many, they become a prolonged chapter of their lives. The psychological toll is immense. Hope is a fragile thing, and in these spaces, it's a constant battle to keep it from shattering. One man, an engineer named Kenji, told me he started measuring time by the changing shifts of the guards. He'd create complex mental puzzles to keep his mind sharp, a way to feel like he still had some control when everything else had been taken away. He described watching families try to maintain a sense of normalcy for their children. Mothers would invent games using only their hands. Fathers would tell epic stories about make-believe worlds. These small acts of love and parenting, happening against a backdrop of institutional gray walls, are some of the most powerful displays of the human spirit you could ever witness. Kenji waited for over 2 months, his engineering skills useless, his future a blank slate. The stories are different, yet they share a common thread. The agonizing suspension of life. Think about it. Your entire existence, your family, your career, your home, your dreams is condensed into a single file sitting on someone's desk. You become a case number, waiting in a queue. You have no power to speed up the process. No way of knowing when, or if, you'll get to the front of the line. One of the most poignant things I heard came from an elderly woman named Sophia. She had been a gardener her whole life. She told me she missed the feeling of soil in her hands more than anything. In the detention center, she'd stare out the window at a single, lonely tree in the yard. She watched it every day, noticing how the leaves changed with the weather. That tree became her connection to the world she had lost, a symbol of life continuing outside the walls of her confinement. She said, "The tree doesn't know it's in a detention center. It just keeps growing. I must be like that tree." She waited for 58 days. These experiences change a person forever. Even after the waiting is over, whether the outcome is positive or negative, the scars of that time remain. It's the memory of powerlessness, the anxiety of the unknown, the days of life that can never be gotten back. When Habir was finally released, he said the simple act of choosing what to eat for dinner felt like an overwhelming freedom. For weeks, he couldn't sleep in a quiet room. He had become accustomed to the constant noise of the detention center. The reality of these waiting rooms is a stark reminder of the human element within vast, complex immigration systems. Behind every policy and every procedure, there are people like Javier, Amina, Kenji, and Sophia. People who are waiting for a chance to work, to reunite with family, to be safe, to simply start living again. Their resilience is astonishing, but it's a resilience they should never have had to learn. Their stories compel us to look beyond the headlines and statistics, to see the individuals caught in the crosscurrents of global migration. It's about empathy, understanding, and recognizing the profound human cost of a system that forces people to put their lives on hold indefinitely. It's a call to remember that while they wait, their lives are not just paused, they are being lived in hardship, in hope, and in a state of suspended animation that few of us can truly comprehend. Thank you for listening to these important stories today. By sharing them, we give a voice to those who are often silenced in the waiting. If these stories moved you, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more chapters that explore the human side of these complex issues. Your support helps us continue to bring these narratives to light. Thanks for watching. Hello everyone, and welcome back to our journey. Today, we delve into Chapter 15, a chapter that touches the very core of our shared human experience. Families, fear, and hope. It's a story woven from the threads of separation and reunion. Moments that define us, break us, and ultimately rebuild us. We all know the feeling, that gut-wrenching twist when you say goodbye to someone you love, not knowing when you'll see them again. It's a universal fear, a cold dread that seeps into the quietest corners of our hearts. Imagine a train station, bustling with the chaos of departure. Steam hisses from the engines, a mournful sound that seems to echo the sorrow in the air. A young mother clutches her child's small hand, her knuckles white. She's memorizing every detail of his face, the sprinkle of freckles across his nose, the way his hair curls just behind his ears. Her smile is a fragile, brave thing, a mask she wears to shield him from her own terror. The train whistle blows, a sharp, piercing cry that shatters the moment. She kneels, pulls him into an embrace so tight it feels like she's trying to fuse them together, to keep him safe within the circle of her arms forever. "Be good," she whispers, her voice thick with unshed tears. "Be brave. I love you." And then, she has to let go. He's lifted onto the train, a small figure waving from a window, growing smaller and smaller until he's just a memory against the receding landscape. That's the moment fear truly takes hold. It's the silence after the train has gone, the sudden, crushing emptiness of the platform. The world keeps moving, but for her, time has stopped. Her hope is a tiny, flickering candle in a hurricane of what-ifs. Will he be safe? Will he be warm? Will he remember me? Each question is a stone added to the weight in her chest. This fear isn't just felt by those left behind. For the one leaving, the journey is a lonely one. Think of a soldier, a young man barely out of his teens, standing on the deck of a ship as the coastline of his home fades into the mist. In his pocket is a crumpled photograph of his family. Their smiling faces a stark contrast to the grim reality he's sailing toward. He's surrounded by a sea of uniformed strangers, each one carrying their own private collection of goodbyes. The bravado and the jokes they share are a thin veil over the shared anxiety. At night, in the quiet of his bunk, he pulls out the photo. He traces the face of his little sister, remembers her piggyback rides and her infectious giggle. He sees his father's proud, worried eyes and his mother's last hug. A desperate, fierce embrace that said everything she couldn't put into words. His hope is not for glory or victory, but for something much simpler: to survive, to one day step back onto that shore, to feel his mother's arms around him again, to hear his sister's laughter. Hope becomes a shield, a reason to endure the fear, the hardship, the uncertainty. It's the belief in a future reunion that fuels every step forward. Separation takes many forms. It isn't always as dramatic as a war or a long journey. Sometimes it's a closed door after an argument, the deafening silence between two people who used to share everything. A father and his estranged son, separated not by miles, but by a wall of pride and misunderstanding. Years can pass, filled with birthdays and holidays marked by a painful absence. The fear here is different. It's the fear that it's too late, that the chasm has grown too wide to cross. It's the fear that the words "I'm sorry" will never be said, or if they are, they won't be enough. Hope, in this context, is a stubborn, persistent thing. It's the mother who keeps setting an extra place at the table, just in case. It's the flicker of a memory of a shared laugh, a reminder of the love that still exists, buried under layers of hurt. It's the quiet decision to pick up the phone, heart pounding, voice trembling, to say, "I miss you." That single act of courage, of choosing hope over fear, can be the first step on the long road back to each other. And what about reunion? If separation is the storm, reunion is the sun breaking through the clouds. It's a moment of pure, unadulterated joy that can erase years of pain. Let's go back to that train station. Years have passed. The platform is just as crowded, but this time, the air is thick with anticipation, not sorrow. The same woman stands there, older now, her face etched with the lines of worry and waiting. The train's whistle sounds, but this time, it's a herald of joy. The doors slide open, and a crowd pours out. She scans the faces, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs, and then she sees him. He's no longer a little boy, but a tall young man. Their eyes meet across the crowd, and in that instant, the years melt away. Time collapses. He's running, she's running, and they meet in an embrace. That's a collision of past and present. The tears that fall are not of sorrow, but of overwhelming relief. The hollow space in her heart is suddenly, miraculously full. The candle of hope she guarded for so long has erupted into a brilliant, warm bonfire. This is the power of family, the anchor that holds us steady in the turbulent waters of life. The reunion of the soldier is quieter, but no less profound. He steps off the ship, a different man than the boy who left. He's seen things he can never unsee, carried burdens he can never fully set down. But as he walks down the gangplank, he sees them. His family, his little sister is a teenager now, and she runs to him, throwing her arms around his waist. His father claps him on the shoulder, his eyes shining with unspeakable pride and relief. And his mother, she just holds his face in her hands, her touch gentle, as if to reassure herself that he's really there, solid and real. In that moment, he's not a soldier anymore. He's a son, a brother. He's home. The fear he lived with for so long begins to recede, replaced by the comforting, unconditional love of his family. Even the estranged father and son can find their way back. After that difficult phone call, they agree to meet. It's awkward at first. The silence is heavy with unspoken words, but then the son mentions a funny memory from his childhood, and the father laughs. A real, genuine laugh. A small crack appears in the wall between them. They start talking, really talking. For the first time in years, they talk about their regrets, their pain, their loneliness. And with each shared vulnerability, the wall crumbles a little more. The reunion isn't a single, explosive moment, but a gradual process of rebuilding, of rediscovering the bond that was never truly broken. It's the realization that love is more resilient than pride, and that family is worth fighting for. Hope has triumphed over the fear of rejection, paving the way for a new beginning. These stories of separation and reunion remind us of what truly matters. Life will inevitably bring us moments of fear and loss. We will have to say goodbye. We will face uncertainty. But it is the hope of reunion, the enduring strength of our family bonds, that gives us the courage to persevere. It's the promise of a hug, the sound of a loved one's voice, the feeling of being home that makes the journey worthwhile. This chapter isn't just about the characters in a story. It's about all of us. It's a reflection of our own lives, our own fears, and our own unshakable hopes. It teaches us that no matter how dark the night or how long the separation, the light of family and the hope of reunion can guide us back to where we belong. Thank you for joining me on this emotional journey through Chapter 15. These are the moments that connect us all. If these stories resonated with you, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel for more deep dives into the chapters that shape our understanding of life, love, and everything in between. We'd love to hear your own stories of separation and reunion in the comments below. Until next time, take care. Hello everyone, and welcome back to our ongoing journey. Today, we're diving into Chapter 16, a chapter that requires a lot of sensitivity and understanding. We're going to talk about a difficult topic: who was turned away. It's a subject that can bring up a lot of questions and emotions, and my goal today is to approach it with the utmost compassion and care. When we hear about people being turned away or denied entry, our hearts naturally go out to them. It's a scenario none of us would ever want to face. The immediate question is, why? Why would anyone be denied a place of refuge, a place of belonging? It's crucial to understand that the decisions we'll discuss were never made lightly. They weren't arbitrary or based on personal dislike. Instead, they stemmed from a deep-seated commitment to protecting the integrity and safety of the entire community. Think of it like building a sanctuary. A sanctuary is meant to be a safe haven, a place where everyone inside can feel secure and supported. To maintain that safety, there have to be certain principles and guidelines that everyone agrees to live by. These aren't just rules for the sake of rules. They are the very foundation that keeps the structure strong and ensures the well-being of all its inhabitants. So, when a small number of individuals were turned away, it was because their actions or intentions posed a significant threat to that very foundation. This wasn't about judging their worth as people. Every individual has inherent worth. This was about behavior. It was about actions that were fundamentally incompatible with the core values of peace, harmony, and mutual respect that the community was built upon. Let's explore what some of these incompatible behaviors might look like. Imagine someone who consistently and deliberately sought to create division, to sow seeds of discord among members who were trying to build a cohesive and supportive environment. Their actions wouldn't just be a minor annoyance. They would actively work against the unity that everyone else was striving for. Allowing such a presence to remain would be like ignoring a crack in the foundation of a house. Over time, that crack could widen and threaten the entire structure. Another example could be someone who refused to respect the shared resources of the community. If a community operates on principles of sharing and sustainability, and one person consistently exploits those resources for personal gain, without regard for the needs of others, It undermines the trust and cooperation essential for survival. It's not about a single mistake or a moment of weakness. We all have those. This is about a persistent pattern of behavior that shows a disregard for the collective good. It's also important to consider the aspect of safety. If an individual had a history of causing harm to others, either physically or emotionally, and showed no genuine remorse or willingness to change, the leadership had a profound responsibility to protect the other members. Bringing someone like that into the fold, without any assurance of change, would be an abdication of that duty. It would be like inviting a predator into a flock of sheep. The primary duty is always to protect the vulnerable. Now, this is the part that requires the most compassion. The act of turning someone away was never the desired outcome. In every case, there were likely numerous attempts at reconciliation, at guidance, at offering a path to change. There were conversations, interventions, and opportunities for redemption. The decision to deny entry was always a last resort, taken with a heavy heart. After all other avenues had been exhausted, it was a recognition that, at that particular moment, the individual was not ready or willing to align with the community's essential principles. This doesn't mean they were deemed irredeemable. It's a statement about their state at that time. The door, in a sense, was never permanently sealed. The hope was always that the individual, through reflection and a change of heart, might one day be able to return. The act of being turned away could, in itself, be a catalyst for profound personal transformation. Sometimes, the most loving thing you can do for someone is to let them face the natural consequences of their actions, in the hope that it will lead them to a better path. Let's think about this from a different angle. If you were part of this community, wouldn't you want to know that the leaders were taking your safety and well-being seriously? Wouldn't you be grateful that there were standards in place to prevent chaos and exploitation? The very measures that led to a few being turned away were the same measures that ensured the community could thrive as a place of peace and security for the many. It's a difficult balance, but a necessary one. The pain of exclusion is real, and we should never minimize it. For the person turned away, it would have been a moment of deep sorrow and perhaps confusion. But the focus here isn't on condemnation. It's on understanding the necessity of upholding core principles for the greater good. The story isn't about a punitive gatekeeper, but about a responsible steward trying to protect a precious and fragile community. It's also a powerful lesson for all of us. It calls us to look inward and examine our own hearts and actions. Are we contributing to the harmony and well-being of the communities we are part of? Are we people of integrity, respect, and love? Are we building up, or are we tearing down? These are not just questions for some distant group of people. They are for us, right here, right now. The principles that guided these difficult decisions are timeless. In our families, our workplaces, our friendships, and our societies, we constantly navigate the balance between inclusivity and accountability. We want to be open and welcoming, but we also need to protect ourselves and our loved ones from harm. We want to extend grace, but not to the point where we enable destructive behavior. The key takeaway from Chapter 16 is not to focus on the exclusion, but to understand the protection that was at its heart. It was a protective measure born out of love and responsibility for the whole. It was about preserving a sanctuary where people could flourish, free from fear and division. The small number turned away is a somber reminder of what happens when one's path diverges too far from the principles of community. But the flourishing of the community itself is a testament to why those principles were so vital to uphold. This chapter teaches us that true compassion isn't always about saying yes. Sometimes, the most compassionate act is to say no, in order to protect the integrity of a sacred space and the well-being of the many. It's a difficult truth, but a profound one. Thank you so much for joining me today to discuss this sensitive chapter. It's not easy, but it's incredibly important. I hope this discussion has brought some clarity and comfort. If you found this helpful, please like, share, and subscribe for more chapters in our journey. I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Take care. Have you ever wondered what it was like for your ancestors to first set foot in America? For millions, their journey began at one single, iconic place, Ellis Island. This small island in New York Harbor wasn't just a processing center. It was the gateway to a new life. The first chapter in countless American family stories. Between 1892 and 1954, over 12 million immigrants passed through its halls. That's an almost unimaginable number of people, each with their own hopes, fears, and dreams. for a better future. Today, we're diving deep into the history of Ellis Island, exploring the incredible stories of the millions who passed through and how this one small island shaped the very fabric of modern America. Before Ellis Island opened its doors, the process of immigrating to the United States was far more decentralized. For most of the 19th century, states managed their own immigration procedures. In New York, the main entry point was Castle Garden, located at the southern tip of Manhattan. It was America's first official immigration station, and from 1855 to 1890, it processed over 8 million people, mostly from Germany, Ireland, England, and Scandinavia. However, as the century drew to a close, immigration patterns began to shift dramatically. The so-called new immigrants started arriving in massive waves from southern and eastern Europe, people from Italy, Russia, Poland, and the Austro-Hungarian Empire. This huge influx of people, coupled with concerns about corruption and inefficiency at Castle Garden, led the federal government to take control. They decided a new, larger, and more organized facility was needed. And so, the search for a location began. The federal government chose a small, 3-acre piece of land known as Ellis Island. It was conveniently located right next to the Statue of Liberty, a powerful symbol of hope for the arriving immigrants. After a massive construction project, which included using landfill to more than double the island's size, the first federal immigration station opened on January 1st, 1892. The very first immigrant to be processed was a teenager named Annie Moore from County Cork, Ireland. She was traveling with her 2 younger brothers to reunite with their parents in New York. On her 15th birthday, Annie was presented with a $10 gold piece, a significant amount of money at the time, marking her as the first of millions to come. This symbolic welcome set the stage for the island's long and storied history. The original wooden structure, however, was short. In 1897, a fire completely destroyed the building, along with years of immigration records. But the need was too great to be stopped. A new, fireproof facility was quickly commissioned. The grand red brick building, with its iconic 4 turrets that we recognize today, opened in December 19, ready to handle the peak years of immigration that were just around the corner. Imagine you've just spent weeks, or even months, crossing the Atlantic Ocean in cramped, often unsanitary conditions in steerage class. Your journey was long and difficult, filled with uncertainty. As your ship finally sails into New York Harbor, the first thing you see is the majestic Statue of Liberty. For countless immigrants, this sight was overwhelming, a powerful symbol of the freedom and opportunity they had traveled so far to find. Tears of relief and joy were common, but the journey wasn't over yet. First and second class, passengers were often inspected briefly on the ship itself, and then allowed to disembark directly in Manhattan. They were presumed to have enough money to avoid becoming a public burden. But for the vast majority, traveling in third class, or steerage, the next stop was Ellis Island. Ferries would shuttle them from the docks to the immigration station, a short but nerve-wracking trip. As they approached the island, they would see the imposing main building, a mixture of hope and anxiety swirling within them. Once on the island, the immigrants were herded into the massive registry room, also known as the Great Hall. This cavernous space, with its soaring, vaulted ceiling, would be filled with thousands of people from all over the world, speaking dozens of different languages. The noise must have been deafening. Here, the infamous 6-second medical exam took place. As people walked up the stairs to the hall, doctors would watch them closely, looking for any signs of physical disability, labored breathing, or illness. They'd check for limps, shortness of breath, or any other visible health problems. Once in the hole, another doctor would perform a quick eye exam, using a tool called a button hook to flip back the eyelid to check for a contagious eye infection that was a common cause for deportation. Anyone suspected of having a health issue was marked with a chalk letter on their clothing. H4 heart problems, E4 eyes, L4 lameness, and pulled aside for a more thorough examination. For most, this was the most terrifying part of the process. The fear of being sent back after coming so far was very real. If they passed the medical inspection, the next step was the legal inspection. Immigrants would line up in front of an inspector's desk, clutching their ship's manifest, which contained their personal information. The inspector, often with the help of an interpreter, would ask a series of around 30 questions. What is your name? What is your occupation? Do you have a job waiting for you? Who paid for your passage? Do you have any relatives in America? How much money do you have? These questions were designed to ensure that the newcomers could support themselves and would unbecome a public charge. They were also asked if they were anarchists or polygamists. Most immigrants had only between $20 and $25 with them, while the entire process on Ellis Island usually only took a few hours. 3 to 5 on average for those waiting. It must have felt like an eternity. Their entire future hung in the balance, dependent on the answers they gave and the judgment of the officials. Despite the fears and anxieties, it's a common misconception that most people were turned away. In reality, the vast majority of immigrants who arrived at Ellis Island were admitted to the United States. Only about 2% were denied entry. The primary reasons for deportation were health problems, like trachoma or tuberculosis, or the likelihood of becoming a public charge, meaning the inspectors believed they couldn't support themselves financially. For this small percentage, being sent back was a devastating blow. They had sold everything they owned and spent all their money on the passage, only to be returned to a life they had desperately tried to leave behind. For those who were detained for further medical or legal review, there were dormitories, a hospital, and dining halls on the island. Families were often separated during this time, adding to the emotional turmoil. The island even had a kissing post, a spot where families and loved ones were joyfully reunited after passing all the inspections. For the 98% who made it through, the next ferry ride wasn't back to a ship, but to Manhattan, and the beginning of their new American life. The peak year of immigration at Ellis Island was 1907, with over 1 million people processed. On a single day that year, April 17th, a record-breaking 11,747 immigrants were processed. The sheer scale of this operation is hard to comprehend. But as the 1920s began, the era of open immigration started to come to an end. A growing sentiment of nativism and fear of foreign influences led to the passage of restrictive immigration laws. The Immigration Act of 1924 established a national origins quota system, which severely limited the number of immigrants allowed from Southern and Eastern Europe and almost completely barred Asians. This legislation dramatically reduced the flow of people coming through Ellis Island. The Great Depression and World War II further slowed immigration to a trickle. The island's primary function shifted from a processing center to a detention and deportation facility for enemy aliens and others. By the mid-20th century, Ellis Island was largely obsolete. With stricter immigration laws and the rise of air travel, the need for a massive, centralized processing station had vanished. The last detainee was released in 1954, and the U.S. government officially closed Ellis Island. For the next 2 decades, the buildings fell into disrepair, silent witnesses to the millions of stories they once held. The paint peeled, windows shattered, and nature began to reclaim the island. It was a ghost of its former self. It wasn't until the 1980s that a massive restoration project began, spearheaded by a foundation led by Lee Iacocca, the son of Italian immigrants. The goal was to preserve this vital piece of American history. In 1990, the main building was reopened as the Ellis Island National Museum of Immigration, a powerful tribute to the 12 million people who passed through its halls. Today, over 40% of all Americans can trace at least one ancestor back to Ellis Island. It's not just a museum, it's a place of pilgrimage where people can connect with their family as past and stand in the very same great hall where their ancestors once stood, full of hope and uncertainty. The American Immigrant Wall of Honor at the museum allows individuals to have the names of their immigrant ancestors inscribed for posterity, a permanent testament to their journey. The story of Ellis Island is the story of America. It's a story of courage, of resilience, and of the relentless pursuit of a better life. It reminds us that we are in many ways a nation built by immigrants, each one bringing a unique thread to the rich and diverse tapestry of American culture. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this journey into the past, please like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more stories that have shaped our world. See you next time. Welcome to our series on the history that shaped us. Today, we're diving into a transformative era in American history. A time when waves of immigrants didn't just arrive on the shores. They fundamentally reshaped the nation. This is the story of how millions of people, seeking new opportunities and fleeing old hardships, changed America forever. Let's set this scene. Imagine the late 19th and early 20th centuries. America's booming, but it needs people. It needs workers, thinkers, and dreamers. And they came. From Southern and Eastern Europe, from Asia, from Latin America, millions embarked on a journey to a land they'd only heard about in stories. They weren't just passengers on a ship, they were carriers of culture, ambition, and resilience. Their arrival marked the beginning of a profound transformation. First, let's talk about the cities. Before this massive wave of immigration, American cities were smaller, more homogeneous. But with the influx of newcomers, urban landscapes began to explode. New York, Chicago, Boston, these cities became bustling, crowded hubs of diversity. Immigrants often settled in neighborhoods with people from their own home countries, creating vibrant ethnic enclaves. Think of Little Italy, Chinatown, or the Polish downtown in Chicago. These weren't just collections of buildings, they were living, breathing communities. They were places where you could hear a dozen different languages spoken on a single street, where the smell of traditional foods filled the air, and where cultural festivals brought the streets to life. These neighborhoods served as a vital support system. New arrivals could find someone who spoke their language, get help finding a job, or simply share a meal that reminded them of home. This clustering of cultures turned American cities into a mosaic. It was noisy, it was chaotic, but it was also incredibly dynamic. The very architecture of the cities changed, with tenements rising to house the growing population. Infrastructure like public transportation had to expand rapidly to keep up. In essence, immigrants were the catalysts that turned American towns into sprawling, modern metropolises. The sheer density and diversity they brought forced cities to innovate and grow in ways they never had before. Now, what did all these people do? They worked. Immigrants were the muscle behind America's Industrial Revolution. They laid railroad tracks that stitched the country together. They toiled in the steel mills of Pittsburgh. They worked in the meatpacking plants of Chicago, and they labored in the garment factories of New York. The work was often grueling, dangerous, and low-paying. Yet, their contribution was indispensable. Without this vast labor force, the rapid industrialization that made America a global economic powerhouse would have been impossible. Take the steel industry. For example, it was dominated by immigrants from places like Slovakia, Poland, and Italy. They endured scorching heat and perilous conditions to produce the steel that built America's skyscrapers, bridges, and machines. Or consider the Transcontinental Railroad, a monumental feat of engineering. A significant portion of the workforce was made up of Chinese and Irish immigrants who faced incredible hardship to connect the East and West coasts. But immigrants weren't just laborers. They were also innovators and entrepreneurs. Many opened small businesses, bakeries, tailor shops, grocery stores that served their communities and added to the local economy. Some, like Andrew Carnegie, an immigrant from Scotland, rose to become titans of industry. Countless others, though less famous, brought with them skills and trades that enriched American industries. Italian stonemasons, for instance, were renowned for their craftsmanship and helped build some of America's most iconic structures. This fusion of raw manpower and specialized skills was a powerful engine for economic growth. Perhaps the most profound impact of immigration was on American culture. It's something we experience every single day, often without even realizing it. Let's start with food. Can you imagine an America without pizza, tacos, or chow mein? These dishes, and so many others, were brought here by immigrants. They started as humble meals, cooked in immigrant kitchens, and sold in small neighborhood eateries. Over time, they crossed cultural boundaries and became beloved staples of the American diet. The grocery stores we shop in today are filled with ingredients from around the world, a direct legacy of this cultural exchange. Music is another fantastic example. The sounds of America were forever changed by the rhythms and melodies immigrants brought with them. The polka, with its roots in Central Europe, became popular in the Midwest. The soulful tunes of Irish folk music influenced American country and folk traditions. And later, the syncopated rhythms brought by African and Caribbean immigrants would lay the groundwork for jazz, blues, and eventually, rock and roll. Our nation's soundtrack is a symphony composed by people from every corner of the globe. Language, too, was enriched. Words like salsa, gourmet, and schlep have all been absorbed into the American English lexicon, reflecting the diverse origins of its speakers. Immigrants also brought new ideas, philosophies, and perspectives. They challenged existing norms and pushed American society to become more open and pluralistic. They founded newspapers in their native languages, established cultural organizations, and fought for their rights, contributing to the ongoing dialogue about what it means to be an American. The story of America is, in many ways, the story of immigration. The late 19th and early 20th centuries were a pivotal chapter in that story. The millions who came to this country didn't just join American society. They actively built it. They constructed our cities, powered our industries, and seasoned our culture with their traditions. They faced discrimination and hardship, but their perseverance and contributions created a richer, more complex, and more vibrant nation. The America we know today, a diverse, multicultural society, is a direct result of their journey. They changed America forever, and their legacy continues to shape our national identity. Thanks for watching. If you found this chapter of history as fascinating as I do, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into the stories that made us who we are. See you next time. Hey everyone, and welcome back to our historical journey. When you think of Ellis Island, what comes to mind? For most of us, it's the image of hopeful immigrants, gazing at the Statue of Liberty, ready to start a new life in America. It's the gateway to the American dream. But what if I told you that for a dark period in its history, Ellis Island became something entirely different? It transformed from a place of hope into a place of suspicion, confinement, and fear. Today, we're diving into the untold story of Ellis Island during World War I, a time when the Golden Door swung in a very different direction. Before 1914, Ellis Island was operating at its peak. Millions of people, mostly from Southern and Eastern Europe, were flooding into the United States. The island's halls were packed, a bustling, chaotic, and ultimately hopeful hub of humanity. But the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand in Sarajevo changed everything. As Europe plunged into the Great War, the tide of immigration slowed to a trickle. Transatlantic travel became incredibly dangerous, with German U-boats sinking ships without warning. The once steaming halls of Ellis Island fell quiet, but this quiet was short-lived. The island was about to be repurposed. As war hysteria swept across the United States, a new kind of fear took root. Fear of the enemy within. German Americans, who had been an integral part of American society for generations, suddenly found themselves under a cloud of suspicion. Was their loyalty to their new home or to the Kaiser? This widespread anxiety, fueled by propaganda, led to a dramatic shift in policy. And that's where Ellis Island's new role began. In 1917, when the U.S. officially entered the war, the government needed a place to detain suspected enemy aliens. Where better than an isolated island with existing facilities for holding large numbers of people? Ellis Island was designated as a primary detention center for German nationals. Men who were merchant seamen on German ships docked in American harbors were among the first to be arrested and sent to the island. They weren't spies or soldiers, just civilians caught on the wrong side of a global conflict. Imagine their confusion and fear. One day you're a sailor earning a living. The next you're imprisoned on an island, labeled an enemy alien. The conditions were a far cry from the immigrant experience. The detainees were housed in the same large dormitories, but now these spaces felt less like temporary way stations and more like prison barracks. Barbed wire fences were erected, and armed guards patrolled the perimeter. The island of hope had become a fortress of suspicion. It wasn't just German sailors. Any German national deemed a potential threat could be rounded up and sent to Ellis Island. This included businessmen, academics, artists, and community leaders. Often, the evidence against them was flimsy, based on little more than rumor, an overheard comment, or association with a German cultural club. The Espionage Act of 1917 and the Sedition Act of 1918 gave the government broad powers to arrest anyone suspected of disloyalty. Life as a detainee on Ellis Island was a monotonous and stressful existence. While they weren't treated with the brutality seen in prisoner-of-war camps in Europe, the psychological toll was immense. They were cut off from their families, their futures uncertain. They organized themselves to pass the time, forming orchestras, putting on plays, and creating art. Some incredible furniture and carvings were made by these detainees, a testament to their resilience and skill. They even published their own camp newspaper. But these activities couldn't mask the underlying reality. they were prisoners. Beyond serving as a detention center, Ellis Island also became a military hospital. The main hospital complex on the south side of the island was taken over by the U.S. Army and later the Navy. It was used to treat wounded American soldiers returning from the battlefields of France. So you had this strange and somber duality on one small piece of land. On one side, you had suspected enemies of the state being held indefinitely. On the other, you had the nation's wounded heroes recovering from the horrors of war. The island was a microcosm of the war's complex and often contradictory nature. As the war raged on, the island's role expanded yet again. It became a central point for processing and deporting radical political activists and anarchists. The post-war Red Scare was beginning to brew, and figures like Emma Goldman and Alexander Berkman were held at Ellis Island before being deported to the Soviet Union. The fear of German spies had morphed into a fear of Bolshevik revolutionaries. When the armistice was finally signed in November 1918, you might think things on Ellis Island would return to normal, but it wasn't that simple. The detainment of German nationals continued for months, even years, after the war ended. The last of the wartime detainees weren't released until 1920. The war had a lasting impact on Ellis Island and on American immigration policy as a whole. The conflict fueled nativist and isolationist sentiments. The idea of America as a melting pot was challenged by the fear that some immigrants could never be truly American. This atmosphere led directly to the restrictive immigration laws of the 1920s, like the Emergency Quota Act of 1921 and the Immigration Act of 1924. These laws established national origins quotas that heavily favored immigrants from Northern and Western Europe and drastically limited arrivals from other parts of the world. The era of mass immigration, the very reason for Ellis Island's existence, was coming to an end. The story of Ellis Island during World War I is a crucial, though often overlooked, chapter in its history. It reminds us that this symbol of hope and freedom also has a more complicated past, one tied to the anxieties of war, the suspension of civil liberties, and the politics of fear. It shows how quickly a place of welcome can become a place of confinement when a nation is at war. It forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about security, liberty, and who gets to be called an American, especially in times of crisis. So the next time you see a picture of Ellis Island, remember its full story. Remember not just the millions who passed through its doors on their way to a new life, but also the thousands who were held behind its fences. Their futures uncertain, caught in the cross-currents of a world at war. It's a powerful lesson from history that remains incredibly relevant today. Thanks so much for watching. If you found this story as fascinating as I did, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into forgotten history. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. See you next time. Hello, and welcome back to our journey through history. Today, we've reached a pivotal moment in our story. The final chapter of Ellis Island. For decades, it was the gateway to America for millions, a symbol of hope and new beginnings. But by the mid-20th century, the tides of history were turning. In this episode, we'll explore why the famous Golden Door of Ellis Island finally closed in 1954. What changed in America and the world to make this iconic immigration station obsolete? Let's dive into the fascinating story of its closure and the legacy it left behind. To understand why Ellis Island closed, we first need to look back a few decades to the 1920s. This was a period of profound change in American society. The country had just emerged from World War I, and a wave of isolationism and nativism was sweeping the nation. There was a growing fear of foreign influences and a desire to preserve a certain idea of American identity. This sentiment directly translated into new, restrictive immigration policies. The era of open borders was officially coming to an end. The first major blow came in 1921 with the Emergency Quota Act. This law was a game. For the first time, the United States set numerical limits on the number of immigrants who could enter the country each year. But it didn't stop there. The law also established a quota system based on national origin. It was designed to heavily favor immigrants from Northern and Western Europe while drastically limiting those from Southern and Eastern Europe. The very people who had been arriving at Ellis Island in droves. Just 3 years later, in 1924, the government doubled down with the Immigration Act, also known as the Johnson-Erd Act. This law made the quotas even stricter and permanent. It set the new quota for each nationality at 2% of the number of foreign-born individuals of that nationality who were living in the U.S. back in 1890. Why 1890? because at that time, the American population was predominantly of Northern and Western European descent. This was a deliberate move to engineer the country's demographic future and fundamentally alter the flow of immigration. The impact of these laws on Ellis Island was immediate and dramatic. The seemingly endless lines of immigrants began to shrink. The bustling Great Hall, once filled with thousands of hopeful faces each day, grew quieter. The island's primary function was shifting. Instead of being a processing center for new arrivals, its role increasingly became one of dissension and deportation for those deemed undesirable or who had violated immigration laws. Another significant change introduced by the 1924 Act was that it moved the primary inspection process overseas. Now, prospective immigrants had to apply for visas at U.S. consulates in their home countries. They would undergo medical and legal inspections there before even setting sail for America. This meant that by the time they arrived in the United States, most of the screening had already been done. Ships would dock directly in New York City, and immigration officials would often just do a cursory check on board. Only those with questionable paperwork or health issues were sent to Ellis Island for further inspection. Then came the Great Depression in the 1930s. The economic collapse brought immigration to a near standstill. With millions of Americans out of work, there was little incentive for people to move to the United States, and the government had no appetite for welcoming new workers. The number of people leaving the country actually surpassed the number of those arriving. Ellis Island, once the busiest immigration station in the world, was now a shadow of its former self, its massive facilities largely empty. World War II delivered another twist in the island's story. With the outbreak of the war, Ellis Island was repurposed by the military. It served as a detention center for enemy merchant seamen and was also used by the U.S. Coast Guard as a training facility. Immigration processing was minimal during this period. The island's focus had shifted entirely from welcoming newcomers to national security. After the war, it briefly resumed its immigration functions. But the world had changed. In the post-war era, global travel was being revolutionized. The age of the ocean liner was giving way to the age of the airplane. Immigrants no longer needed to endure long sea voyages. They could fly directly to airports in major cities, where new immigration facilities were being established. This made a large, centralized, island-based processing station like Ellis Island seem increasingly antiquated and inefficient. The logistics of transporting people and supplies to and from the island were expensive and cumbersome compared to processing arrivals at an airport. By the early 1950s, the writing was on the wall. The number of detainees and immigrants being processed at Ellis Island had dwindled to just a few hundred. The massive complex of buildings, designed to handle thousands a day, was now costing the government a fortune to maintain for a handful of people. It was a financial drain and a logistical headache. The government realized that the island's time had come to an end. In the final years, Ellis Island was primarily a detention and deportation center. Its last detainee was a Norwegian merchant seaman named Arne Petersen, who had overstayed his shore leave. He was released on November 12, 1954, and with his departure, the island's long and storied history as an active immigration facility came to a quiet close. The federal government officially shut down Ellis Island later that month. For the next 2 decades, the island was abandoned. The once grand buildings fell into disrepair, silent witnesses to the millions of stories that had passed through their halls. The paint peeled, windows shattered, and nature began to reclaim the land. It became a ghost island, a forgotten piece of American history sitting in the shadow of the Statue of Liberty. But the story doesn't end there. In the 1960s and 70s, a renewed interest in ethnic heritage and ancestry swept through America. People began to look back at their family roots, and many of those roots led directly to Ellis Island. Preservationists and historians recognized the island's immense historical significance and campaigned to save it from ruin. Finally, in 1965, President Lyndon B. Johnson declared Ellis Island a part of the Statue of Liberty National Monument. This paved the way for its restoration. After a massive fundraising effort, led by Lee, the main building was beautifully restored and reopened to the public in 1990 as the Ellis Island National Museum of Immigration. Today, millions of visitors walk through the same halls where our ancestors once stood, connecting with a vital part of their personal and national history. The closure of Ellis Island in 1954 marked the end of an era of mass migration through a single, iconic gateway. It reflected major shifts in American law, society, and technology. But its reopening as a museum ensured that the stories, the struggles, and the dreams of the 12 million people who passed through its doors would never be forgotten. It remains a powerful testament to the fact that America is, and always has been, a nation of immigrants. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into the final days of Ellis Island. It has a story that tells us so much about where America has been and how we became the country we are today. If you found this interesting, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel for more explorations into history. I'd love to hear your thoughts, or if you have a family connection to Ellis Island, share it in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. For decades, Ellis Island stood as a silent witness to a monumental chapter in American history. After processing its last immigrant in 1954, the island's grand halls fell into disuse and decay. For years, the buildings were abandoned, left to the mercy of time and the elements. The once bustling corridors, which had echoed with the hopes and anxieties of millions, were now eerily quiet. It seemed as though this vital piece of the American story might be lost forever, a forgotten ghost in New York Harbor. But the story of Ellis Island was far from over. A new chapter was about to begin, one of preservation, remembrance, and education. In the 1960s, a movement began to save this national treasure. President Lyndon B. Johnson declared Ellis Island part of the Statue of Liberty National Monument in 1965, a crucial first step toward its preservation. However, it would take years of dedicated effort and fundraising to bring the island back to life. The vision was ambitious: to transform the former immigration station into a museum, a place where future generations could learn about the immigrant experience and connect with their own heritage. The challenge was immense. The buildings were in a state of severe disrepair, but the spirit of the place remained, waiting to be rediscovered. The primary force behind this monumental restoration was the Statue of Liberty Ellis Island Foundation, formed in the early 1980s. In partnership with the National Park Service, they launched one of the most successful public fundraising campaigns in American history. People from all walks of life, many of them descendants of Ellis Island immigrants, contributed to the cause. It was a project fueled by a collective desire to honor the past and preserve the stories of those who had passed through these halls. This wasn't just about restoring brick and mortar. It was about restoring memory and meaning. After years of meticulous work, the main building, with its iconic registry room, was painstakingly restored to its 1918 to 1924 appearance. Architects and historians worked together to ensure every detail was authentic, from the tiles on the floor to the paint on the walls. The goal was to allow visitors to step back in time and experience the space as the immigrants once did. On September 10, 1990, the Ellis Island Immigration Museum officially opened its doors to the public, marking a triumphant new beginning for the island. It was a day of celebration, a testament to the power of memory and the importance of preserving our shared history. Today, the Ellis Island National Museum of Immigration is a world-renowned institution, welcoming millions of visitors each year. As you step off the ferry and walk into the baggage room on the ground floor, you begin a journey that follows the footsteps of the immigrants. The exhibits on the first floor, such as Journeys, The Peopling of America, set the stage, exploring the history of immigration to America, from the colonial era to the present day. You'll see artifacts, photographs, and personal stories that illustrate the diverse waves of people who have shaped the nation. This broader context helps visitors understand that Ellis Island is just one, albeit crucial, part of a much larger story of migration. The emotional heart of the museum is undoubtedly the Great Hall, or registry room, on the second floor. Standing in this vast, vaulted space, it's impossible not to feel the weight of history. This was the first great test for new arrivals. Here, they waited in long lines for their medical and legal inspections. Their futures hang in the balance. The exhibits in the surrounding galleries delve deeper into this process. You can see the actual inspection desks, medical equipment, and the stairs of separation which directed immigrants toward their new lives in America, toward detention, or back to their home country. The air itself seems to hold the echoes of a dozen languages, a mix of hope, fear, and sheer exhaustion. The museum's exhibits are rich with personal narratives, through oral histories, letters, and family photographs. The story of immigration is told not just through statistics, but through the voices of the people who lived it. In the Treasures from Home exhibit, you can see the precious few belongings people brought with them: a worn-out Bible, a simple musical instrument, a piece of handmade lace. These simple objects speak volumes about the lives left behind and the hopes carried forward. They are powerful reminders that history is made up of individual human stories, each one unique and valuable. One of the most popular features of the museum is the American Family Immigration History Center. Here, visitors can access a vast, digitized database of the ship manifests for the millions of immigrants who were processed at Ellis Island. For many, this is a deeply personal experience. People come from all over the world to search for their ancestors' names, to find that tangible link to their family's past. Discovering a relative's entry records seeing their name, age, and port of origin can be an incredibly moving moment, connecting the present directly to the past and making history feel intensely personal. It's a place of discovery and emotional reunions with the family history many thought was lost. Beyond the main building, the story continues. While the south side of the island, which housed the hospital complex, is not fully open to the public in the same way. Special hard hat tours offer a glimpse into this unrestored part of the island's history. These tours take you through the dilapidated wards of the contagious disease hospital, a poignant and haunting reminder of the trials many immigrants faced. The peeling paint and abandoned corridors tell a powerful story of sickness, healing, and a dedicated medical staff who worked there. It has a stark contrast to the restored grandeur of the main building and adds another layer of understanding to the Ellis Island experience. Another powerful feature on the island is the American Immigrant Wall of Honor, located outside, overlooking the Statue of Liberty and the Manhattan skyline. This series of stainless steel panels is inscribed with the names of over 775,000 immigrants. Unlike the historical manifests, this wall is a way for contemporary Americans to honor any immigrant ancestor, regardless of when they arrived or through which port they entered. It's a living monument, a beautiful testament to the idea that America is a nation built by people from all corners of the globe. Finding a family name on the wall is a moment of pride and connection for many visitors. Ellis Island today is more than just a museum. It's a site of pilgrimage. It's a place of reflection, education, and remembrance. For the 40% of Americans who can trace their ancestry back to this island, it is sacred ground. But even for those without a direct family connection, Ellis Island tells a universal story of hope, resilience, and the enduring quest for a better life. It challenges us to reflect on what it means to be an American and to consider the ongoing story of immigration in our world today. The island stands as a permanent reminder that the United States is a nation of immigrants, a mosaic of cultures, traditions, and stories. The journey through the Ellis Island Museum is a journey into the heart of the American identity. It honors the courage of the 12 million souls who passed through its gates and celebrates the profound contributions they and their descendants have made to this country. By preserving and sharing these stories, Ellis Island ensures that the legacy of our immigrant ancestors will never be forgotten. It remains a beacon, not just of the past, but for the future. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more chapters in our shared history. Ellis Island, a small patch of land in New York Harbor, holds a significance far greater than its size. For over 60 years, it was more than just an immigration station. It was the gateway to a dream. From 1892 to 1954, more than 12 million immigrants passed through its halls, each carrying a unique story of hope, hardship, and the universal human desire for a better life. Today, we're going to explore why this island became and remains a powerful symbol of courage, dreams, and new beginnings. Imagine stepping off a crowded ship after weeks, sometimes months, at sea. You've left behind everything you've ever known: family, friends, a homeland torn by poverty, persecution, or conflict. Your first sight of America is the Statue of Liberty, and your first steps on its soil are here, at Ellis Island. The air would be thick with anticipation and anxiety, a babel of languages from every corner of the globe swirling around you. You're exhausted, you're uncertain, but you are here. The journey to Ellis Island was an act of immense courage. It wasn't just a physical voyage across a vast ocean. It was a leap of faith into the unknown. People sold their belongings, said gut-wrenching goodbyes, and boarded steamships, often in crowded and unsanitary steerage conditions. They faced seasickness, disease, and a constant fear of being turned away at their destination. This journey wasn't for the faint of heart. It required a deep well of resilience and a powerful belief that the risks were worth the potential reward of freedom and opportunity. Every person who arrived was a testament to the strength of the human spirit. Upon arrival, the Great Hall became the next hurdle. This vast, vaulted room, which you can still walk through today, was the registry room. Here, immigrants faced a series of medical and legal inspections. Doctors would perform what was known as the 6-second medical exam, looking for any sign of illness that could prevent entry. Public health service doctors were looking for everything from contagious diseases like trachoma to signs of mental or physical disabilities. For many, this was the most terrifying part of the process. A chalk mark on your coat could mean further inspection, quarantine, or even being sent back. Think about the sheer emotional weight of that moment. Your entire future, the future of your family, hung in the balance, decided in a matter of minutes. The legal inspection followed, where officials asked a series of questions. What is your name? Where are you from? Do you have a job waiting? Do you have any money? These questions were designed to ensure that newcomers could support themselves and wouldn't become a public burden. While over 98% of immigrants who arrived at Ellis Island were ultimately admitted, the fear of that 2% chance of rejection was palpable. For those who passed, the experience was transformative. The moment they were cleared, they would descend the stairs of separation at the bottom. They could exchange their foreign currency for US dollars, buy train tickets to their final destinations across the country, and often reunite with family members who had arrived before them. Imagine the tears of joy, the embraces, the overwhelming sense of relief. It was in these moments that Ellis Island truly became the Isle of Hope. It was the physical manifestation of a new beginning, the starting line of a new life. The stories of those who passed through are as diverse as the countries they came from. A young woman from Ireland, escaping famine, hoping to find work as a maid. A Jewish family from Russia, fleeing pogroms, seeking religious freedom. An Italian farmer, looking for work to send money back home to his family. Each of them brought their skills, their culture, their traditions, and their dreams. They weren't just looking for something asterisk from asterisk America. They were bringing something asterisk to asterisk it. These new Americans went on to build our cities, work in our factories, farm our lands, and start businesses. They became doctors, artists, scientists, and leaders. Their children and grandchildren continued to contribute, weaving the rich, multicultural fabric that defines the United States today. It's estimated that nearly 40% of all current U.S. citizens can trace at least one of their ancestors to Ellis Island. It's not just a historical site, it's a part of our collective DNA. Even for those who were sent back, the story doesn't always end in despair. While heartbreaking, the experience often fueled an even stronger resolve. Some tried again and succeeded. Their stories, too, are part of the island's legacy. Reminder that the path to a dream is rarely easy and often filled with setbacks. The island was a place of both triumph and sorrow, which makes its symbolism even more profound. Today, visiting the Ellis Island National Museum of Immigration is a deeply moving experience. Walking through the same halls where millions waited, you can almost hear the echoes of their voices. The exhibits, the personal artifacts, the photographs of hopeful and weary faces, they all tell a powerful story. It's a story about leaving the old world behind and embracing the new, about the courage it takes to start over, and about the enduring power of dreams. Ellis Island stands as a permanent monument to this journey. It reminds us that America at its core is a nation built by immigrants, a nation continually refreshed and strengthened by new arrivals, seeking the same things our ancestors sought: safety, liberty, and the chance to build a better life. It's a symbol that transcends time, reminding us of the incredible bravery it takes to chase a dream and the profound hope that fuels the journey. The island itself may be quiet now, but the spirit of the 12 million souls who passed through it continues to resonate, a timeless symbol of courage, dreams, and new beginnings. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe for more journeys into our shared history. What's your family's immigration story? Let us know in the comments below.